Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I want to first mention that this is a current situation and it could happen again in the future, so I'm not 100% at ease with it yet. Well, I'm young, I'm 19 and male, and despite my age, people usually think that I'm around 15 or 16. A lot of times, I go to church at night, and to get there, I have to pass through a stretch where there aren't many people or traffic. It was in this place that at least twice, a man who I don't know approached me, offering me a ride on the motorcycle that he always rides. I'm saying every time and always, but it's only happened twice. But having it happen once and then a second time made me more worried. It makes me feel like I'm being followed or that he knows exactly where and when I pass by alone. The first time I saw him, I was walking down the street and he came by on his motorcycle. I thought he was asking for directions, so I tried to listen to see what it was, but as I got closer, I realized that he was only looking down at me and not at my face. So I made up an excuse and I kept walking. I was lucky because he didn't follow me or insist. The second time that I was heading to church, he was already on that same street. This happened weeks or months after the first encounter. Again, he tried to get my attention, but I was walking on the other side of the street and I pretended to not notice him. I was really worried and scared at that point because I saw that it was happening again, so I kept walking straight. I could already see the church, but he came by on his motorcycle, stopped right by the edge of the road, got off, and came up to me offering a ride. And by chance, there weren't any cars passing by, so I crossed the road. You have to cross a road that connects cities to get to my church, and many cars pass through it. That day, there was a celebration with a lot of people, and I stayed the rest of the night talking with friends from there, out of fear that this man would enter or do something. Fortunately, I got a ride back in a car, and I wasn't alone. My biggest fear is that this could happen a third time, since now, he knows where I'm going to. Some time ago, I told my husband that I was heading to the store. I just needed to grab some last-minute supplies for the dinner that we were hosting that night. Our closest friends, Mike and Grace, were moving across the country for a new job opportunity. It was a bittersweet farewell, and we wanted to send them off with a proper meal and an evening filled with laughter and memories. We had been through so much together, from celebrating their kids' birthdays to sharing countless holiday dinners. Their move was a big change for us, but we understood that the opportunity was too good for them to pass up. So I wanted everything to be perfect for their send-off. I drove to the local shopping center. It was a small place not far from our house. It was a weekday afternoon, so I wasn't surprised to find the parking lot sparsely populated. There were just a few cars dotted with wide expanse of asphalt, leaving plenty of space to park wherever you wanted to. Inside, the store was calm and quiet. There weren't many people shopping, which was nice because it made it easy to move through the aisles and focus on my list. I grabbed a cart, I started picking up items that we needed, some fresh vegetables, a nice cut of meat, and a couple bottles of wine. As I moved from aisle to aisle, I felt a subtle sensation that I was not alone. I then noticed a man who seemed to appear in every section that I visited. He was average looking, wearing a plain jacket and jeans, nothing remarkable or nothing that made him suspicious or creepy. and at first, I really thought that it was just a coincidence. I mean, we were shopping after all. But as I moved to the dairy section, there he was again, seemingly focused on the same area. I tried to brush off the feeling, telling myself that it was just paranoia or the eeriness of the near empty store. But when it happened again in the frozen food section, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. I decided to test my suspicion by taking a detour to a part of the store that I didn't need anything from. The aisle with cleaning supplies. And sure enough, moments later, he appeared there, pretending to browse products on the shelves. It was just weird. He didn't look at me, he didn't say anything to me, but he was just there wherever I went to. My heart started to race, the realization setting in that this wasn't mere chance. I kept my head down though, pretending to look at my list, trying not to let him see that I was aware of his presence. I then quickly pushed my cart towards the checkout area, hoping that the cashier would deter him. As I unloaded my items onto the conveyor belt, I glanced back and saw him standing a few aisles away, partially hidden behind a display stand. And this time, his eyes were fixed on me. I could barely concentrate as the cashier rang up my items. My thoughts were scattered. There was a mix of fear and disbelief, and once my groceries were bagged, I moved quickly towards the exit. I wanted to go home, but something inside me told me not to exit the store alone. I did not feel safe knowing that this guy was following me around. What if he was outside waiting for me to get into my car and then jump out? Or what if he followed me home? The store didn't have a security guard, and the only worker that I could see was the young and petite female cashier. So I decided to do the only thing that I could think of, to contact my husband. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone. I texted my husband, telling him about the strange man who seemed to be following me in the store. I asked him to come over, needing his presence. I waited near the store entrance, trying to act casually, but my heart was pounding whenever I saw a shadow or hear footsteps approaching. 10 minutes passed, though it did feel much longer. I saw my husband parking, and then he walked towards me. Relief just washed over me. He approached with a calm demeanor, but his eyes showed that he understood the situation. And funny enough, at the exact moment, I saw the man in the corner. Looked like he just popped out of nowhere. And as soon as the man who had been following me noticed, he turned around and left, quickly disappearing out into the trees behind the store. I stayed close to my husband as we walked back to the car. I was looking around to make sure that the man was truly gone. I then got in my car and I drove, and my husband drove his, following me out of the store. The whole experience left me shaking inside. I did call the non-emergency hotline to report the incident, so if something happens to someone else, at least they already have an idea that there's a suspicious man going around that area. We never did see that man again, and I am grateful for that. But the sense of security that I once felt while shopping alone was altered. It was a day that reinforced the importance of staying alert and trusting your instincts. And you bet that after that incident, I never went to that store without my husband. Hello, I'm a 20-year-old female, and I have a stalker who is 20 to 21 and male. This started about 2 to 3 months ago. I work in an art store and I do a little of everything, helping customers, cleaning, stocking shelves, and many more. One day, this guy comes in asking for help as he never really took up art before. And lucky me, I was chosen to help that guy. We talked for a bit and I asked what he wants to learn, what medium he wants to use and such. He said that he's into sketching at the moment, but he wants to expand his horizon. I say cool, and I give him a few directions. And somehow, it comes up that I'm also an artist. And he then gets really interested. He asked me if I can help him with art, which caught me off guard because, huh? I said that I'm not a professional and I'm not interested in teaching. But he took that well, and off he went. The next week he returns again and specifically asked for me. He said that he brought his sketchbook this time, which I found very odd since I don't remember agreeing to help him. He shows me some of his sketches, and I noticed that he only draws K-pop singers, and I realized that one of them is a member of BTS. I don't really listen to them, but I just pointed it out. He then starts raving about BTS and K-pop and the like, which is like, okay? Apparently, I hit a sweet spot for him because nobody likes K-pop and I know of it. Anyway, he starts coming in now every few days and I'm really disturbed by him. I also found out that he learned my work schedule, my birthday, my name, how old I am, and many more. I only found this out because of a few encounters with a said customer. Number 1. One day, I clock into work and I see him waiting in the stairs for me. He then acts all surprised like, "Whoa, I didn't know you were coming in so early." And I could tell that he's lying because he was sweating really badly and couldn't look at my face, and it creeped me out so much. Number 2. On my birthday, he came up to me at the exact time that I'm supposed to start my shift, and he gave me a gift and a note. He drew a member of a band that I like and gave me a birthday card, and told me that he wanted to bring me something a day before my birthday because he knew that I wouldn't come in the day of. Mind you, I never told him my birthday. He probably overheard me talking about it to my coworkers, but it creeped me out so much. I had insane amounts of anxiety and I had to muster up the courage to act like I wasn't completely off-put by this. After he walked away, I looked at the note that he wrote me, which said, "Happy 20th birthday. Keep making people happy and being so kind. P.S. I'm not a paper thief, so you can have this back." Huh? Paper thief? And then I realized that the paper the note was written on was a piece of garbage that I threw away months ago. He picked it up from the trash to return to me. That made my blood run cold. Number 3. He came in and asked for help like usual when he brought up buying something for kids. And because I wanted to know if maybe there's a wife or something involved, I asked, "Oh, how old are your kids?" Obviously, I also need to know to give him age-appropriate supplies. He then started freaking out and saying that those weren't his kids and that he's not married. And then started asking me if I'm married. I said that I'm not married, but I am in a committed relationship and have been for 5 years now. Which was a lie, but he got very disappointed. He then walked off, and I thought maybe that was it. He didn't come in for 2 weeks and I was overjoyed up until today. He came up to me during work while I was busy and asked for help, and then asked where I was for 2 weeks, which really confused me, but also disturbed me deeply. I tried my best to not interact with him, and I told my coworker to take over for a while I go hide in the back. She agrees and keeps him busy, and then he just ends up leaving. After he left, she called me over and said that I can come out, and I asked, "Did he ask anything about me?" And she looked at me with a concerned look and said, "Yeah, he did. He asked why you're so busy suddenly, and when you'll come out and if you work tomorrow. I am riddled with anxiety, and it's making me really anxious at work because I'm afraid to see him. Thankfully, he hasn't done anything physical to me, but it's putting a lot of mental strain on me, and I don't want to quit because I love my job and my co-workers. Also, very important to mention, after the birthday incident, the moment that he left, I went up to management and told them everything about him, and that it creeps me out and I feel really unsafe. My manager said, "Well, it's totally legitimate to go after a girl you like. That's what men would do back in the day. You should feel flattered." And the co-owner said, "It's all because women wear little clothes nowadays. It makes the men act up." And just to note, I have to conform to dress code and I haven't even showed as much as a shoulder. I told my parents and friends, and they are all on my side and think that he's a complete weirdo. Honestly, I don't know what to do about it. It's really creepy, and I'm scared to encounter him again. I, a 30-year-old female, went to a concert last night with a group of friends. Towards the end of the concert, I noticed the man appearing near me every time that I went to a different area of the venue. I may have said a couple words in passing, but we didn't exchange names or anything. After the concert, I was talking to my friends and one of their family members when I noticed this man was there next to us again. When we left the venue to walk my friend's mom to her car, I told my friends about the strange man and that I thought that he was following me inside the venue. I said this pretty loudly, and I decided to turn around to see if anyone heard. He was right there, about 3 paces behind us. I immediately told my friends that he was there, and my BFF was like, "Is it you?" and essentially told him to get lost. I'm still feeling really weird about the whole encounter. What would have happened if I had been alone? Edit. I am not asking for advice. I plan to bring a taser next time that I go out, and I will look into purchasing a small firearm in 2025. Women shouldn't have to protect ourselves from creeps. How about people just stop being creeps? One of my friends just reminded me of this story, so I figured that I would post it here. This happened towards the beginning of our freshman year in college. My best friend, another freshman girl my age, and I befriended this other freshman guy, and we quickly became a tight-knit group. We would hang out with each other constantly, to the point that some assumed that we were siblings or roommates. At the beginning of our first semester, one of us were really into the whole party scene, so we spent most of our time wandering around campus into the late hours of the night. I'm talking 4 to 5 a.m. some nights. We had lots of fun adventures and made all sorts of fun memories doing this. But we had our fair share of weird encounters, both with other people and some that we cannot explain to this day. This story happened not on the weekend, but I believe on a weekday close to midterms. I remember us all studying in one of the academic buildings together late at night. And then one of us mentioned wanting to take a long walk around campus just to help relieve the stress. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. at that time, and we decided to hike out to one of the scenic overlooks on our campus. Our campus was pretty rural, and it was surrounded by woods, so there was a path through the woods that you could take or you could just walk on the main road. We decided to follow the road. It was really dark, and this particular area of the campus had very few streetlights. We were using our phone flashlights to see where we were going. It was probably not the best idea to be roaming around campus so late at night, but we were stupid freshmen and had done it plenty of times before. Our campus felt safer due to it being so rural. We made it to the overlook, and we were the only ones out there due to how late it was. No cars were parked or anything. The way it's set up is that the road goes into the circle around the overlook. We were sitting on a bench with our backs to the main road, just talking about random things, when all of a sudden, we felt headlights on our backs, so we all turned to see who it was. It wasn't entirely unusual for a car to be out there late at night. Our campus police do regular patrols of the area, or students will go there to hook up or use drugs. The car was an older GMC Yukon-style SUV and was a dark forest green color. I vividly remember the color because you typically don't see many cars that color, you know? We all watched as the car came in from the road, drove around the little circle, and then went back up the road. We just went back to our conversation, but 2 to 3 minutes later, we could see the headlights behind us again. We again turned to look and realized that it was the same green car as before, coming back a second time. We didn't think much of it, but I could tell that my friends were slightly weirded out about it. Again, the car approached from the road behind us and then went around the loop, but was driving much slower this time. They kind of stopped midway through the circle for a few seconds before slowly driving away again. But it isn't that unusual for cars to go slow around that circle portion, especially if they are tourists or someone wanting to enjoy the view of the lookout. So we again didn't think much of it and figured that they came back a second time just to enjoy the sights again, although it probably wasn't much of a sight given how dark it was. We again tried to carry on with our conversation, but I think all of us felt a little uneasy now. I almost wasn't surprised when about another 2 to 3 minutes later, we saw headlights approaching from behind us again. We all turned around hoping that it wouldn't be the same car, but of course, it was. We were each pretty scared now, but I think we were all trying to laugh it off, and we were like, they must love it here. This time, they once again slowed way down going around the circle and rolled their windows down to yell at us. We were sat far enough back from the circle and it was a windy night, so we couldn't really make out what it was that they were yelling, but we all agreed that we heard, "Gonna get you" towards the end. We also couldn't see well enough to recognize faces, but could see enough to know that it was a car full of younger men. We were all pretty uneasy and confused at this point, and after they drive off, we frantically are trying to figure out how to handle the situation. We first were trying to brush it off and calm each other down by saying that it was probably some of our mutual friends just trying to scare us. But none of us recognized the car or the voices enough to say that that was for sure the case. We all considered walking back since it was late anyway, but we were all so scared that we would just run into this car again on the main road. My best friend and I tried to laugh it off, agreeing there was simply no way that it would drive by a fourth time and that we were probably making a big deal out of nothing. But my male friend who was with us kept telling us that he just didn't have a good feeling about it and said that if the car came by again, he would try to take photos of its license plate and then call the campus police. We eventually agreed with him, figuring the car likely wouldn't come by again. After 5 minutes and no sign of the car, we all relaxed and continued carrying on. But of course, we were wrong. We all sat in silence as the headlights approached for the fourth time, Neither of us really wanted to say anything or look behind us to confirm that it was the same dark green car. As the car rounds the circle, our male friend stands up with his phone in hand in an attempt to take a picture of the license plate. This time, instead of completing the circle and going back up the road, the car suddenly pulls into a parking spot off to the side. My friends and I are all panicking, assuming the worst is about to happen. We were all waiting for someone to step out of the car or for the car to leave, when our male friend suddenly gets up and is like, this is fucking ridiculous. I'm going to talk to them. My other friend and I are begging him not to, since we don't know who these people are or what they are capable of. But he brushes us off and starts walking towards them. At this point, I think he was still assuming that it was likely a friend or a fellow student just trying to scare us and not some randos. My friend and I are freaking out as we watch them approach this car, and whoever is driving rolls the window down and sticks their head out. It was definitely not someone we knew. It was a guy, probably a few years older than us, who looked rough. Absolutely not the person that you would want to run into at 3 a.m. in the woods. My friend and I watched this guy and our friend start talking, and to us, it looked like the guy in the car was really angry. We were debating whether or not we should go ahead and call the police, but as soon as my friend managed to dig her phone from her bag, our friend was walking back towards us, and the green car was leaving. We all looked at him like, "What the fuck, man?" And he explained that the car was filled with creepy-looking guys a little older than us. The driver had explained that they were from out of town, a city about an hour away from us, and had gotten bored, so they decided to drive around campus to mess with the students when they came across us. One of the passengers had seen my friend get up to take what he correctly assumed was a photo of their license plate, so they then freaked out and then decided to pull over and tell us that they meant no harm since they didn't want to get in trouble. They apologized to my friend for scaring us and explained that they would leave. My friend was so scared while talking to them that all he could really say was, yeah, maybe don't do that again because we almost called the police." We all calmed down significantly after they left and eventually felt safe enough to leave. From what I remember, I think we ended up getting lucky and were able to find another friend who also happened to be awake late that night who came to drive us back so we wouldn't have to walk. We all laughed about the situation now since ultimately nothing bad had happened, but it still gives me the creeps. What would have happened if my friend hadn't tried to take a picture of their license plate? Were they planning something else that we prevented? Why was this group of random men who lived over an hour away randomly driving around a rural college campus on a random weeknight? It hit me a few days after this all happened, but I realized that I had seen that car before. Earlier in the day when this all happened, I had spotted the same exact car a few times around campus. It drove past me as I was walking to my morning class. Again, when I was coming out of the library later in the afternoon, and again at the dining hall in the early evening. I made note of it the first time I saw it since it was such a uniquely colored car and also happens to be one of my favorite colors. As I kept seeing it, I remember thinking, I have a stalker. But I did not take it seriously at that time since it's a smaller campus that has a lot of traffic that time of year. So I figured that it was just a tourist and a coincidence that I kept seeing the car. But now, I really wonder, were they following me the whole day? Had the car been around before this, and I just never noticed it? What do you guys think? My name is Haley, and I work in a downtown office building, and I'm buried in paperwork and numbers as an accountant. Most days, I clock out at a reasonable hour, but today was different. A few unexpected projects landed on my desk, and before I knew it, the city outside my window had turned dark. My phone had buzzed earlier with messages from friends making evening plans since it was a Friday, but work kept me tied to my desk. By the time that I left, the streets were extremely quiet, with only the occasional late worker like me heading home. I usually carpool with a colleague, but she had left early for a family emergency, and I didn't want to bother anyone, so I decided to take the bus home, something that I rarely did after dark. The bus stop was just a block away from the office. It was a small, lonely structure under a flickering streetlight. The route was very straightforward, but the stop itself was not exactly welcoming. It sat at the corner of two quiet streets, bordered by a tall, shadowy building that seemed to loom over you. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the narrow alleyways and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. As I approached the stop, I noticed someone already waiting there. A man. He was standing in the shadows, partially obscured by the dim light. He wore a dark hoodie, and the hood pulled low over his face. He had jeans that had seen better days, and his posture was relaxed, but something about it felt off, like he was too comfortable in this eerie setup. I just gave a polite nod and I kept my distance, standing a few feet away from him. My eyes wandered around hoping to spot the familiar lights of the bus, but the street remained as empty as before. The man seemed to shift closer though, not much, but enough for me to notice. I checked my phone, pretending to be engrossed in something important, though the screen was just lit up with a homepage. A few minutes felt like an eternity, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence, and I could feel his eyes on me. It was just a weight that was impossible to ignore. I glanced in his direction, and he flashed a grin that was more unsettling than friendly. I turned away, trying to focus on the street again, determined not to make eye contact with the sky. And finally, the bus appeared. I got in, and I chose a seat midway down the aisle. But to my dismay, the man followed, sitting directly across from me. The bus was nearly empty, with just a few passengers scattered here and there, and his presence felt too close, too deliberate. During the ride, I kept my gaze fixed out the window, just watching the lights outside. But I could see his reflection in the glass. He tapped his foot a lot and occasionally leaned forward, as if trying to catch my eye. The space between us felt charged with a tension that set my nerves on edge. When we finally reached my stop, I stood up, hoping that he would stay put. But as I stepped off the bus, he followed. He was maintaining a steady pace behind me. The street was familiar to me, of course, but his presence turned it into an unfamiliar territory. I was feeling discomfort and I couldn't shake it off. I took deep breaths, walking with purpose, trying to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. But his footsteps echoed mine, mirroring my every move. I knew better than to head directly home, so I decided to cut through a small plaza, hoping to lose him in the tangle of paths and benches. He hesitated at the edge of the plaza as I took a convoluted path. I was weaving between trees and benches. It was an impromptu detour that thankfully seemed to confuse him. I glanced back once and I saw him standing at the entrance, casting a shadow that seemed to stretch towards me. With the thudding of my heart in my ears, I slipped out the other side, heading to a nearby convenience store. The bright lights and the presence of other people grounded me, pulling me out of the spiral of anxiety that I was feeling. I stayed there for a while, just pretending to browse the aisles until I was sure that he hadn't followed me. And when I was sure, I walked home. When I finally made it home, I was relieved immensely. I locked the door behind me, and that little click sound when you lock the door seemed to be the most comforting thing at that moment. And I just continued with my night. I don't know why I didn't call the police or told anyone. I just decided to myself that I am never going home that late ever again. So I was 19, and I had been with my current fiancé and at that time boyfriend for a year. We both work at the same chemical manufacturing company. I was the night shift lead on my team, and we had hired this guy who I will call Gabe. Gabe was somewhere around late 50s, early 60s, and I had to interact with him as the shift lead and trainer pretty much no matter what. And at night, there was pretty much no one else besides my fiancé's team on the other side of the building and my team present after 2 p.m. So I was pretty much entirely in charge of my team and everything that had to get done. And this is for context and why my ability to avoid him was extremely limited. Anyway, Gabe started talking to me about his type and preferences in women. I didn't see how this was relevant to me and made it clear that I didn't care what his preferences were and accept that everyone had their own. I didn't want to make a big deal out of a seemingly small topic at that time. But he then proceeded to share his ideologies with me, and I remained aloof about the whole subject. It was along the lines of, "It's fine if women work temporarily, but eventually, the goal is to settle down and have children. After all, it works better to have someone working to pay the bills and someone else to manage all the household work." I am quite aware that this is a life people are comfortable with, and I respect it, as I also respect other religions even if I do not follow them. I do not personally agree that the household requires someone to stay home to manage it all the time, nor do I think that if someone does that it has to be the woman. But as far as these conversations went, I didn't see any connection between them and me, and mostly, I just let him prattle whatever he wants to get off his chest, as it wasn't my business. I am not a traditional woman, and figured if anything, I was the opposite of this description anyways. He and I did get into a heated argument once about America's economy and how it's so much better here because everyone can be rich, which I try to explain how it is impossible for everyone to be rich in an economy. Well, the story moves on, and my fiancé was let go for health reasons, and he had to go on unemployment. We only shared one vehicle, and I only had my driver's permit at that time, so I wasn't comfortable driving alone back home at 1 a.m. So I gave my boss a 3 weeks notice just to ensure that I could train everyone up to speed so they weren't screwed over in my absence, which is a notion that my boss very much appreciated. I told the team, and that's when Gabe started behaving in a disagreeable manner. In week 1, I had a hickey on my neck. My boss knew and never made any complaint or fight against it. This wasn't overly common, it's just sometimes happened. But considering that we didn't deal with customers, he certainly didn't care about it. But Gabe did. While I was working, he tapped my shoulder and I assumed that he had some kind of question for me, so I paused to listen, only for him to address my hickey. "Don't you think it's a little unprofessional?" To which I replied that we do not need to put on a show for anyone, and it doesn't hinder my ability to work in any fashion. Well, what if it bothers people or our boss that you're parading your personal life like that? I said that if my boss told me that it was unacceptable, I would take the extra effort to ensure that it didn't happen again. But considering how no one has said anything to me before, I assume that they do not care, so neither will I. So, you don't care if it hurts someone's feelings? No, I do not really, because their feelings about my life are not my concern. Anything they think about it is only their own assumption of what happened anyways, making it their own imagination. Now, I also thought the last response was a weird one anyway. There's no reason my hickey should hurt someone's feelings at work. Questioning my professionalism is a separate issue entirely. But it didn't matter as Gabe walked away. Then while we were all at lunch, Gabe was sitting across from me at the table, and I was talking with the person next in line to be the lead, when I noticed Gabe was holding his phone up at a weird angle. I didn't want to make an accusation when I couldn't be 100% certain, but my instincts told me that he took a picture of me at work. However, this will be later confirmed. On my last week, I had been officially fed up with Gabe, and I had trained the girl after me to everything that I knew as a lead, and I told her that she will be calling all the shots on my last week, and I will simply be here for support if she needs it. I also informed her privately that I will especially not be conducting any verbal interaction with Gabe as I no longer needed to, and I would appreciate it if she took charge on that which she agreed. Unfortunately, Gabe took a stand on this, ultimately forcing a conversation with me in his last week. I just don't think I can take orders from a woman. She can't be my boss. I told him that I had been his boss previously and that the boss above my boss was also a woman. He simply refused to accept it. I then told him that it didn't matter how he felt because I was leaving and she would be in charge, so he could accept that or quit, and it didn't matter to me. I also told him then that I would no longer answer his questions and he would have to go to her. Fate had it out for me though, because on my last day, she had an emergency and needed to leave early, and with us already down another person, it was just me and Gabe that night, much to my displeasure. Again, left with having to direct him around, which he clearly had no issue when it was me. As we were leaving, he stops me on my way out and asks a question that glued all the pieces together. I know your boyfriend is unemployed now, so how would you feel if someone asked if you left your boyfriend for someone who could provide you with a house, a car, and everything that you needed? This made me lose it momentarily for two reasons. One, I love my fiancé very much, and now currently we are going on 6 years together. And second, I have always worked hard for everything I have with my own two hands, and I take major offense to being treated like some desperate damsel in distress who would be with someone over the concept of money. I am not shallow, nor am I materialistic. So I answered pretty honestly, and I told him that I'd be extremely offended because that's not the kind of person I am, and to assume so would indicate such a lack of knowledge about me and insult my character. And then I left, ready to never see him again or talk to him again. It was clear in the end that from the very beginning, he was approaching me with romantic intentions, and gross as it all was, the age gap disgusted me as well. I was 40 years younger than this man. I still had contact with the girl who took my place, and she told me after I had left, he was telling people that me and him were in love, and I was gonna leave my now fiancé for him, and he was showing people the picture he took of me. So glad that that was confirmed. 3 months later, he texted me with a "hey" and a smiley face, Because as his boss, I gave my number to employees to let me know if they couldn't come in for work. I told him to never contact me again and that I only spoke to him because I was the lead and I needed to be in contact with others. And there was no reason to speak to each other anymore. Then I changed my number to ensure that he never could again. I was about 14 back then. I had skipped school and I decided to go to a mall. This mall was known to have creepy teenagers or men who stalk and hit on girls, and I've had some small experiences there before. But it was 8 a.m. and I didn't think anyone could do that in broad daylight. Well, they did. And since then, I haven't been back to that mall alone. I got off the bus and I went to the entrance that had a little playground in front of it. I thought that it would be safer if there were kids or families around. I sat on a swing and I pulled out my phone to pass some time until I could get back home. There was an old lady with her granddaughter on the kids slide near me, and I for sure felt safe being near them. After about 5 minutes of me scrolling on my phone, I heard the voices and screams of teenage boys. I looked up, and in a few seconds, they were running around and causing a commotion everywhere. And at that moment is when I started to not feel safe anymore because I knew to expect the worst. I knew them. The town and the city knew them. They were not nice people, even though they were teenagers a little older than me. I stood up to go inside because they started looking at me and sneakily going near me. I thought there would be a big crowd enough inside the mall for them not to follow me around and potentially do something. I went in a store inside the mall to buy myself something and take my mind off the situation. I didn't hear or see them on the walk to the store or on the walk back where I sat on a couch that they had inside the mall. I really thought that I lost them. But I still didn't let myself feel safe enough though, not until I was out of there. A minute or two later, I was again scrolling on my phone when I saw them. This time, I didn't wait around. I stood up and I walked to the bathroom, which had a huge hall before you reach it. I noticed them following me and I walked faster. And when I reached the girls' bathroom, I went in one of the stalls and I stayed there for a full 30 to 40 minutes just on my phone until I thought that it has been long enough for them to give up and then leave. I exited the stall and I started washing my hands when I saw them. 6 boys peeking inside the girls' bathroom, which had no door, looking right at me and joking around with each other. A couple of them were close enough to be considered basically fully inside the bathroom, and I remember hearing one of them saying, "Yeah, I think it's her," or something like that to the other. That's when, while still washing my hands, I was frantically coming up with a plan. Do I just risk it and walk out? Do I call someone to get me? Do I ask someone to walk out with me? I went with the third option, and I looked around and there were maybe around 3 to 4 women there. The closest one to me was around 40 years old, and she was drying her hands. I had a fight with myself if I should ask her to walk out with me. And I decided to do it because I basically had no other safe option. I was shaking at this point, building up the courage to speak, and then I did. "Excuse me, I'm sorry. Can I walk out with you? There's this group of boys who have been following me around almost all morning, and they're waiting outside for me." There was a pause. Thoughts flooded my mind. I shouldn't have asked. She must think that I'm insane. But then she agreed, and we walked out. I didn't even glance at the direction of the boys. The woman's husband was waiting outside of the bathroom for her, Seeing him made me super relieved because now the boys would be hesitant to follow me and the woman because there was a man with us. She explained the situation to her husband. I could see that he didn't fully believe or understand the situation, but he ended up agreeing to walk out with me and his wife out of the long hallway to the exit. And while walking, I briefly explained how the boys had been following me, and they seemed to understand. When the end of the long hallway came, they went their way into a store, and I went off to the exit as fast as I could. When I passed the security guard, I felt safer, but not as safe as when I got out of that mall. When I was outside, I finally got some fresh air and I realized how panicked I was. I ran to the closest bus stop that was far enough from the mall, if that makes sense, and I came home early that day and didn't even care if anyone found out that I skipped school. I have been avoiding that mall as much as I can since then. I don't want to think about what would have happened if I were to walk out alone that day, or if I weren't so focused on my surroundings. To the woman and her husband who walked out with me, thank you. My name is Fred, and I played in a small local band. We were nothing big, just a group of friends who jammed together and occasionally played gigs at bars and even local events around the town in the 1980s. Music has always been my escape, a way to express what words cannot, and I play the guitar, and my bandmates say that I've got a knack for it. The band came into existence somewhat organically. It started with Mike, our drummer, who I met through a mutual friend. We clicked instantly over our shared love for old rock bands. And then there's Jenny, our bassist, who joined after we heard her play at an event one night. Her skills were undeniable, and she brought a new groove to our sound. And lastly, we had Jesus on the vocals. He's got this raw, powerful voice that commands attention and has always been the face of our band. We don't play for fame or money, but for us, it's about the joy of making music together, feeling that rush when a song comes together perfectly. We usually practice in Mike's garage, surrounded by old posters and instruments that we've picked up over the years. It's comfortable, it's a creative space where our ideas flow as easily as the music. Our biggest audience is usually made up of familiar faces, our friends, our family, and some locals who enjoy our sound. We don't expect much more than that, really. So, when we started seeing a new face at every gig, it caught my attention. She was always there, front row, watching intently. At first, I thought she was just another music lover, but there was something about her. I'm not saying that in an I'm in love kind of way. It was a I'm feeling uncomfortable kind of way. She stood out not just because she was always there, but because she had this intensity in her eyes. It was as if she was trying to memorize every chord, every lyric. I'd see her mouthing the words to our songs, and it was flattering at first. I mean, who wouldn't want a dedicated fan, right? But soon, it began to feel more personal. Our band started gaining a bit more attention locally, thanks to some decent write-ups in the town blogs. And that's when she started appearing off stage too. After our gigs, while packing up our gear, I would spot her hanging back, waiting near the exit or outside the venue. Once or twice, she tried to approach, but with the noise and bustle, it was easy to slip away unnoticed. Despite the growing crowd, her presence became something that I just couldn't ignore. She started showing up at places where I wouldn't expect. I'd see her at my favorite coffee shop, sitting a few tables away, or at a park where I sometimes went to clear my mind. She never approached me. She just watched from afar with that same intense gaze. I brushed it off at first, convinced that I was imagining things or being paranoid. After all, it was a small town and paths were bound to cross. But when she started to appear outside our band practice sessions, any semblance of coincidence vanished. We would wrap up a late night session only to find her standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows, watching us pack up. It was unsettling, this constant feeling of being observed, so I talked to the band about it, but they laughed it off. To them, it was just a harmless fan, maybe a bit over-enthusiastic, but definitely not a threat. Jesus even joked that it was good for our image to have real fans. But something about it just didn't sit right with me. I tried to ignore it, hoping that she would lose interest and move on. But instead, things escalated. I started receiving anonymous notes left under the windshield wipers of my car or slipped into my guitar case when I wasn't looking. They were meticulously handwritten, filled with detailed descriptions of our performances and personal comments that felt too intimate, too informed. The notes made it clear that she knew more about me than a casual fan should. Little things about my life that were never shared publicly. It was as if she had peeled back layers to see things meant only for me. I became hyper aware of my surroundings, looking over my shoulder more often than before. The joy that I found in playing in front of a lot of people started slipping away, replaced by anxiety and discomfort. One night, after a particularly draining gig, I found myself alone picking up my guitar in the empty venue. The others had left already. I was a bit late since I had to battle with nature in the toilet. I'm sorry for that. Well, as I turned to leave, there she was, standing directly in the doorway. Her presence in the dim light felt almost surreal. My heart pounded as I forced myself to stay calm. I was pretending to check my phone as I moved towards the exit. She didn't say a word. She just watched with those intense eyes that haunted me for weeks. I slipped past her, out into the cool night air, hoping that the darkness would swallow me up before she could follow. This encounter really creeped me out, so I reached out to a friend of mine who was working in law enforcement, and I explained the whole thing. He took it seriously, which was great. He then offered some advice on how to document everything and stay safe, saying that they really couldn't do anything if I didn't have definitive proof. From that point, I took precautions. I was always making sure that I wasn't alone when leaving gigs or practices. I informed the band again, who finally understood the seriousness of the situation. They offered their support, making sure that someone was always with me, especially when going home late at night. But funny enough, after everyone and even myself was taking this more seriously, the sightings became less frequent, as if she sensed the shift that I was documenting stuff and observing her more seriously. Playing with my band is still one of my greatest joys in life, but it's different. I'm more cautious, more aware of how exposed we are on stage, even in our small town bubble. It's a strange balance, finding comfort in the spotlight while knowing what lurks just beyond. But it taught me the value of boundaries. Anyway, I just wanted to share this creepy old story of mine. I was compelled to right after joining Reddit and then discovering this sub. So yeah, stay safe everyone, and rock on. So, this story was from years back. To start, It was me, a 13-year-old female, and my best friend, who was also 13 and female. I was a bit sheltered as a kid, and I was never allowed to walk around and explore outside the house. My mom was worried about weirdos and accidents, and I always thought that she was paranoid, till this day. It was around 5 p.m. and getting dimmer, and I convinced my best friend to go on a walk with me to this abandoned train just a couple blocks down. We would hang out there and annoy our friend who lives right next door to the abandoned tracks. We had walked out our house and barely made it a few doors down when we saw this yellowish beige car slowly pull up towards us. They stopped dead center in the middle of the road, and the car was basically a fishbowl, and we could see what looked to be 5 men cramped in it. They were all smiling, not even a friendly, excusable smile, but one of pure derangement and craze. 3 of them proceeded to get out of the car and stand there smiling at us like they were about to charge us. If I'm not misremembering, I think they also had popped their back trunk. I can't forget the face of the man closest to us. He was the creepiest. His smiling was menacing, and he was breathing heavy out of excitement. My best friend ran down the block immediately, and I followed after her. She turned the corner into the midsection between her neighborhood and the one behind. There was a gap between the neighboring fences, and we quickly ran into it far enough down that you couldn't see us the best. We waited for 2 to 3 minutes to see if they followed. And sure enough, we saw that same car driving past with all the men looking around to see where we had gone. We froze, hoping to God or anyone really that they didn't see us. Hoping that if they did, we could outrun them, or at worst, hoping that our screams could alert either side of the neighbors we were hiding behind. And after about a minute, we booked it back to her house and ran back inside hoping that they somehow weren't waiting for us. She shuddered out of breath. This is why we can't walk alone. And I felt guilty and terrified. We peeked out our blinds for 5 to 10 minutes seeing if they would come back, and sure enough, they did, and they were still slowly searching for us. We thankfully didn't have any other issues after that, but now I'm happy that my mom was always too scared to let us out of her sight. Who knows what could have happened any other time if this happened to us after our 3rd or 5th outing alone. I recently read a story on Let's Not Meet that brought back old memories of my dad's crazy ex-girlfriend. This took place when I was around 8 to 9 years old, so I guess it would have been the year 1997. My parents had gotten divorced several years prior, so me and my little sister, 2 years younger, used to stay with our dad every other weekend. One day, he introduced us to his new girlfriend, Rachel, who was a tall blonde woman that had apparently won some kind of beauty pageant or something. I remember those first months of getting to know Rachel as fun. She seemed like a nice lady. I also think that my initial impression of her was helped by the fact that she had a rather cuddly gray parrot and a pet raven that could talk, which of course made my younger self quite ecstatic. But after a while, things started to change. I began to notice that she could be a bit odd at times, seeing weird things or acting a bit strangely. We started seeing her less frequently when we were staying with our dad. Then one day, he told us that they had broken up and that we wouldn't be seeing her anymore. He also told us that we shouldn't talk to her or go home with her if she showed up at school. Not long after that, Rachel really started harassing my dad. She would randomly turn up at places we went to visit during weekends, She would be trying to talk with us. She called him non-stop on the phone when we were at home, crying, making threats. It usually didn't stop until he pulled the plug. And years later, I found out that she had even threatened to kill me and my sister on several occasions, and that Dad got a restraining order. Rachel also keyed my dad's car, broke into his company to trash it, and stole a lot of money that he never got back. She even started writing threatening letters to my mom. My parents have always been good friends ever since the divorce, and it all culminated with a letter from the authorities. A letter accusing my dad of being a child molester. I still vividly remember how Mom sat us down in our room, holding the letter, a deep look of concern on her face, asking if Dad had ever touched us inappropriately. Which, of course, he never was. It later turned out that it was Rachel who had falsely accused him of such in an attempt to prevent him from seeing us. I remember feeling really angry and upset that she had gone to such lengths. The last memory that I have of Rachel was a few weeks before Christmas. We were staying at my dad's place over the weekend. It was a 2-story apartment complex with a large window spanning an entire wall, floor to ceiling, in the living room where we had just sat down to watch TV. Next to the window, there was a glass door leading onto a stone patio. It was bordering a lawn that ended with a tall hedge, and on this particular day, the outdoor lights had been switched off, which means it was pitch black outside as the intro to Superman started playing. A while into the episode, I suddenly heard a strange sharp noise coming from the window. It sounded like something was clawing on the glass in an attempt to get in. The sofa I was sitting on was placed right in front the window, so I had my back toward it when I slowly turned around to look over my shoulder, my heart thumping in my chest and my hairs standing on end as if I was being watched. But all that came into view was a pitch black darkness lurking behind my own reflection. And by this point, Dad had also heard the sound and had gotten up to turn on the patio lights. When the outside suddenly flooded with light, I found myself staring into the face of a smiling blonde woman peering into the living room. Need I tell you that I screamed? Both me and my sister flew up from the couch like it had been scorched with fire, and then we ran behind our dad. When I looked toward the window again, I saw Rachel with both of her hands up against the glass, tightly cupped beside her face as she was trying to look inside. The patio door was right next to her. I tugged on Dad's shirt and I whispered if the door was locked when she reached out toward the handle. That millisecond of doubt flashing across my dad's face still haunts me to this day. Rachel truly looked like a madwoman as she furiously jerked on the handle in an attempt to get in, briefly pausing to peer through the glass now and again. I remember thinking Dad looked oddly calm as he ushered us around a corner wall, telling us to stay out of sight. As he walked toward the patio door, we begged him not to go outside, thinking that maybe she could have a knife hidden somewhere. So he opened up a small crack with the door, firmly holding onto the handle, and asked what the hell she was doing in the backyard. She tried to get him to let her in, putting on a big smile, tossing her hair, but Dad obviously wouldn't budge, telling her to leave or that he would call the cops, to which he eventually conceded, leaving a bunch of Christmas presents behind. When Rachel was out of sight from the window, Dad went out to make sure that she was gone, picking up what she had left behind on his way back. None of us wanted anything to do with the presents. Something just really felt off about them, so they ended up still fully wrapped in the trash. My name is Adam, and I used to think that breakups, while hard, were something that you could eventually move on from. I dated a girl named Janine for about a year. We met at a mutual friend's party. She was charming, fun, and had this infectious energy that drew people to her. For a while, we were very happy together. But over time, things changed. Our differences became more apparent, and what started as minor disagreements grew into full-blown arguments. When we finally decided to call it quits, it felt like the right decision for the both of us. I thought that we would part ways amicably, each going forward with our own lives. But it didn't turn out that way. Well, not for Janine. It started with harmless texts, little messages checking in on me, asking how I was doing and what I was doing. I didn't think much of it at that time, just an ex trying to be friends. But then, the messages became more frequent and their tone shifted. She started bringing up moments from our past, reminiscing about the times that we had spent together. It was as if she was trying to pull me back into something that I already let go of. I responded politely at first, hoping to set some boundaries, but it only seemed to encourage her. Janine's attempts to stay connected quickly turned intrusive. She began calling late at night, leaving voicemails that sounded more desperate with each one. I would wake up to find a series of missed calls and increasingly emotional messages. It was unsettling, hearing her voice through the speaker, going over things that felt long resolved. I tried to distance myself, so I didn't reply to her much, so that it would also give her space to move on. But then, she started appearing at places that I frequented, seemingly by coincidence. I'd see her at the coffee shop near my work, at the gym, even at the pet store when I was getting some food for my buddy. At first, I thought that it was just bad timing. But then, it became clear that she was deliberately showing up where she knew that I would be. The final straw was when one night, while I was at home watching TV, I heard a knock on my door. I was about to open it, which is unfortunately a habit of mine, but something in my gut told me to check first. It was so weird. It was such a strong feeling. So I did. I looked through the peephole, and I saw my ex, but there were two men behind her. I did not like the sight of that. I asked her through the door what she wanted, and she said that she just wanted to talk. I told her to leave, but that's when they started banging and kicking on the door. My dog started barking like crazy. I dialed 911 on my phone, and I told them what was happening, while also running around the house, checking if the doors and windows were locked. And then, when I made sure that they were all locked, I took my dog and we went inside my bedroom and locked ourselves in there. To the credit of the police, they did arrive in less than 5 minutes. They probably had a unit around close to my house for some reason. My ex and her 2 male cousins were taken away, and I then explained to the officer what happened. A long story short, she won't be bothering me anytime soon. Stay safe, guys. Choose your partner wisely, because some people are crazy. At the time that this encounter occurred, I was a female and 19 years old, and I had just closed the store that I was working at with another coworker. They drove home, and since I lived just right across the street, I thought that I was safe to walk home alone. After all, it's just a 2-minute walk to my apartment. The apartment that I lived in had an auto shop below the building, which my uncle owned. And this is important info, trust me. It was around 9:30 at night, so it was pretty dark out, and the roads were empty. Not even 10 seconds after I walked across the street, A dark blue minivan pulls up beside me out of nowhere, and this kind of startled me, so I looked at the driver in confusion. I was carrying some bags of stuff that I bought from work, and the guy driving the van noticed and asked if I needed a ride. I kindly declined his offer and just told him that I lived a few minutes away, and so I started to continue walking. But the guy started slowly following me and continued. "Are you sure you don't need a ride? I mean, I don't mind." He asked again and again, and I continued to decline and I kept walking. But he was persistent, and this started to creep me out, so I started walking faster and I ignored him as he would repeatedly say things like, "Come on, get in my car. Come on, get in the car. Get in the car. Come on, get in." I was afraid to run inside the apartment because I really didn't want this creep to know where I lived, so I was going to just loop back around the building to lose him. Thankfully, I noticed that the auto shop's light were on and the garage door was open. My uncle must have been working late in the shop, so I sped walked towards the open garage, and the van sped off in a hurry as soon as they were about to pass by the open garage door. I told my uncle about what just happened and waited a few minutes before walking back out to get into my apartment. I locked all my doors and windows and I stayed in the living room until my dad came home from our cousin's house. And thankfully, I never saw that van again. I did finally buy some pepper spray after this incident. I usually always had my weighted pocket knife on me, but I had actually left it at home that day after using it to cut thick string for some crafts that I was working on. And to everyone, even if you only have to walk 2 minutes to get to your destination, even if you think you're safe, please treat it like it's a 20-minute walk home at night in a really sketchy town. Always be on high guard and continue with caution when going anywhere alone. If you at all don't feel safe walking alone and you have anyone like friends or family that you know you can trust that wouldn't mind giving you a ride or even tag along with you, don't be afraid to ask because it might just save your life. Hi everyone, my name is Chris, I'm female, and I'm 29, and I own a little flower shop nestled in the heart of town. It's a small business, but one that I have poured my heart into. Flowers have always fascinated me. Their colors, their scents, the way they can speak volumes without even uttering a word. Every day, I wake up early, excited to spend my hours surrounded by their beauty, arranging them into bouquets that brightens people's lives. Running a florist shop is not just about selling flowers. It's about being part of people's stories. I make arrangements for weddings, birthdays, and even those somber occasions like funerals. Each order carries its own significance, and I feel honored to be a part of those moments in some small way. I have a few regular customers who pop in throughout the week, but most days, I enjoy a steady flow of new faces, people who wander in off the street, drawn by the fresh blooms that line in the shop windows. It's really a peaceful job, one where I get to express creativity and share a bit of joy with the world. But today, I'm not writing solely to share about my job. I'm writing about an experience that I had that I considered somewhat scary, creepy, disturbing. I'm not quite sure what word is best to describe it, so I'm just gonna leave my story here and let you decide. A few months ago, a new customer started visiting the shop. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about him. He appeared polite and reserved. He was asking simple questions about the different types of flowers and also their meanings. I was more than happy to help. I was enjoying the chance to share my knowledge and passion. He came in regularly, more frequently than most, and in each visit, he bought a small gift. It could be a single cookie, a little smiley note, always different from the last. I thought nothing of it initially, since those were very simple gifts. I thought that he just appreciated the work that I do. Lots of people enjoy having fresh flowers at home, so maybe it was to thank me for that. But over time, I started noticing a pattern. He was always there, lingering in the shop, watching me closely as I worked. He began asking questions that felt too personal, wanting to know more about my life beyond the shop. I tried to keep the conversation light and professional, always steering it back to the flowers and their care. But his interest in me felt different, and it was starting to make me uneasy. One day, as I was closing up, I noticed him standing across the street. He didn't approach or wave, he just stood there watching as I locked the doors. It left a knot in my stomach, a feeling that I couldn't quite shake off. What the hell is he doing? I tried to wave at him, but he didn't wave back or say anything, so I just walked on and headed home. I convinced myself that it was harmless. Maybe he was just having a rough day. But then, he started showing up outside of the shop. And I would see him in grocery stores, the park where I took my morning walks, even at the cafe that I frequented on weekends. It was hard to dismiss as a coincidence when it happened so often, almost like he knew my schedule. The unease grew into something more when I received a letter in the mail. It wasn't like the usual orders or thank you notes that I sometimes get from the customers. This one was different. It was addressed directly to me with no return address. Inside, it was a single photo of me, one that looked like I didn't know that there was even a camera, and it was on a day where I wasn't in the shop. It also had confessions of love and admirations, and there was no sign of who sent it at the bottom. Reading it sent chills down my spine. It was clear that someone was watching me closely, and I couldn't help but connect the dots back to him. The thought of having an unwanted observer tracking my life was frightening. It made the world feel smaller, less safe. I became more cautious, and I was altering my routine slightly, trying to avoid being too predictable, and I started leaving the shop at different times, taking alternate routes going home, hoping to shake off the feeling of being followed. But everywhere I went, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there. Despite the growing tension, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy in the shop. My work was my refuge, a place where I could focus on beauty of the flowers and forget, if only for a moment, the creepy person or shadow or whatever that seemed to lurk in my life. But his presence was persistent. One evening after closing, I found a single flower left on the doorstep, a lily, my favorite. At first, I thought that it was just a kind gesture, but in context, and after everything that happened, it felt like something darker, a message meant only for me. Well, one night, everything was confirmed when he came into my shop again. I felt a chill, but I acted normal and professional, asking him with what I can help him with. And the words that came out of his mouth next was something that I kind of expected, but still gave me a shock and definitely frightened me. I can't remember it word for word, of course, but it was something along the lines of, "Why? Why are you not interested in me? Have I not been giving you enough attention? Am I not enough for you?" The way he said it wasn't sad. It was full of anger and desperation. I told him that I am not interested in being in any kind of relationship at all since I am busy working on my business and my dreams, and that I am sorry for not being able to return his feelings, but I'm just not interested. His expression became dark after I said those, and he looked like he was coming closer to me. So I told him that I will be willing to call the police if he doesn't leave me in my shop alone. That must have snapped him out of whatever he was thinking. And then he turned around, but before he left, he said, "This isn't over." I'm not gonna lie. I tried my best to act brave, but damn, was I scared out of my mind. I knew that I needed to take action, especially with the threat he left. I reached out to a friend who understood my situation. I explained everything that had happened. It was actually a relief to talk about it, to have someone validate my fears. Together, we decided that it was the best time to involve the authorities. I reached out to the authorities and I filed a report. They said that they couldn't do much without proof. But then I remembered that these things happened in my shop that had my security cameras. I gave them access to it, and they were able to trace back not only the latest interaction, but even the past multiple occurrences when he came to my shop. I was able to file a restraining order against him, and everything went back to normal. I apologize if there wasn't something in my story that seems very scary or dramatic, but to me, it was one of the scariest things that I have ever been through. So, to the man who stalked me in my own flower shop, let's not meet again. Hi Reddit. I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this. It's kind of embarrassing, really. Growing up, I always thought stalkers were something only women had to deal with. Yet, here I am, a 35-year-old construction manager, tangled in my own unsettling story. I suppose the best place to start is at the beginning, of course. I'm Jeffrey, and this started back when I was just a high school kid, learning some tough lessons about love and trust, if you get what I mean. It was my sophomore year, and the excitement of teenage life was in full swing. One evening, I went to a party, one of those typical teenage gatherings where everyone's trying to seem older and wiser than they actually are. That's where I met Cindy. She was beautiful, vibrant. She had long dark curls and a contagious laugh that could light up a room. Something clicked between us, and before long, we were inseparable. She was my first love, and everything felt perfect. Or at least it did at that time. We spent our sophomore and junior years wrapped up in our little world, full of all the promises and dreams that young love tends to hold. Cindy was everything I thought I wanted. But then, in our senior year, the bubble burst. I discovered that Cindy was cheating on me with a friend of mine. It was as if my whole world had been turned upside down. I was heartbroken and I was devastated. And what made it worse was Cindy's reaction. And despite being the one who broke our trust and betrayed me, she refused to let me go. She kept calling and texting me, saying she wouldn't allow us to break up. She kept showing up at places that I was in. She would make scenes, and she was desperately trying to pull me back in. And I just did my best to ignore her. But it was agonizing and embarrassing, and I hated every moment of it. And at that time, I wasn't even thinking about my first heartbreak. I just wanted to get away from her. Thankfully, things cooled down after graduation as we went our separate ways to different universities. I would sometimes get a random friend request from her on Facebook, and maybe a text or two during freshman in college. But after I completely ignored those attempts, it stopped too. I had no more news or knew anything about what happened to Cindy after that. I just moved on, buried myself in studies, and I considered that chapter of my life closed. Fast forward, now we graduated, have jobs, and are adults. Last year, I had to travel to another state for work, just a week long project. And on my lunch, I went to a local restaurant, and while sitting there and eating my food, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around, and there she was, Cindy. She had matured, and her style had changed, but those curls and that smile were unmistakable. We exchanged pleasantries, catching up briefly on life. I let it slip that I was just in town for work, and casually mentioned where I lived now. It seemed harmless, like an innocent chat with someone from the past. But looking back at it now, that was definitely a grave mistake. I then finished my meal, not giving the encounter much thought, and I went about my business. My project wrapped up, and I headed back home. I was eager to return to my routine. All was well until a few months later, when I was at the grocery store doing my usual Friday night shopping. I don't really know why I like shopping on that day. While walking down the aisles, I bumped into someone, and it turned out to be Cindy again. She acted all excited, beaming as she greeted me. In my surprise, I asked if she was in town for work too, and I laughed about the coincidence. She smirked, explaining that she had moved here for a job opportunity. It seemed plausible at that time. After all, people move for work all the time. But then, things started to feel strange. The next morning, I went to the gym as usual, early to avoid the crowds. And there she was again, Cindy on the treadmill. For the first time, I felt a little unnerved. I mean, what were the odds, right? But I dismissed it, thinking maybe she was just exploring her new town. And then, during a jog in the park one day, she was there again, sitting on a bench, seemingly waiting for me to pass by. I shrugged it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later, she started showing up at the cafe where I grabbed my morning coffee. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. This wasn't a big town, but the frequency of our encounters was too high to be mere coincidence. I don't see my best friend this often, and he lives just a few houses down. Each time, Cindy would light up as if she had planned to run into me. Sometimes, she would rush over for a conversation. Initially, I nodded politely, gave a smile and a wave, sometimes even talked to her. But as these encounters kept happening, I started ignoring her entirely, hoping that she would get the hint and then leave me alone. But then things just got creepier. One evening, I found a small bouquet of flowers on my doorstep. No note, just flowers. A few days later, a card was slid under my door with nothing but a smiley face drawn on it. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was just a prank by some teenagers. But the unsettling feeling wouldn't leave. The most unnerving incident happened last night. I was in bed, winding down, when a knock sounded at my window. My bedroom window, no less. I froze. It had to be the wind or an animal, I thought. But then the doorbell rang. I got up, checked the peephole, but no one was there. As I headed back toward my bedroom, there was a knock on the back door, and my heart was pounding. Someone was definitely messing with me. But why? Then, the doorbell rang again. This time, I sprinted to the front door and I flung it open just in time to see someone running away. It was a woman with long dark curls, disappearing into the night. Cindy, It had to be her. I mean, who else could it be? The height, the hair, it all matched. And on the doorstep lay a folded note. Cliche, sure, but it chilled me to the bone. It read, I'm always watching you. I'll see you around, handsome. That was the last straw. I'm at a loss for what to do now. I don't know if I should call the police. Would they even take me seriously? I mean, it sounds ridiculous. A grown man being harassed by an ex girlfriend from high school. But it's real, and it's terrifying. I'm not sure how to make it stop or what steps to take. If anyone here has any advice, I would really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me share this. It's a really strange world we live in, and sometimes the past refuses to stay where it belongs. I will update you if anything else happens. Hi, my name is Elaine, and I'm a female. I wanted to share an experience that I had that extremely disturbed me. So here it goes. Ever since I was a child, books had been my sanctuary. I remember spending countless hours tucked away in a cozy corner of the library, just losing myself in stories that sent me to different worlds. My parents, while supportive in getting me the books that I want, never really understood my fascination. They weren't big readers themselves, and neither were my friends. For them, books were just objects that we used at school. But for me, they were gateways to a new adventure and understanding. Growing up, I carried this passion with me. It was that one constant thing in my life. Despite the pressure of school and life, I always found the time to read. But there was one thing missing: people. The kind of people that I could share my love of books with. I longed for discussions about characters, themes, and stories that steered my soul. With none of my friends or family into reading, I often felt like I was experiencing these worlds alone. I just didn't have anyone to share my excitement or passion every time that I discover or read a new book. It took a lot of courage, but I finally decided to join a book club in my town. I had read about it online. It's a small group that met every Friday evening at a local bookshop. This wasn't just any bookshop, it had a quaint little cafe too. You could say that it's the perfect spot for book lovers to gather over coffee and chatter. There was just something so reassuring about the idea of being surrounded by people who shared my enthusiasm for reading. On my first visit, I was a bundle of nerves. I was unsure of what to expect, really. But I was pleasantly surprised. There were about a dozen of us, not too many, but enough to make it feel like a community. I quickly made friends with a few of them. There was Hannah, a lively woman who loved historical fiction. She had this infectious enthusiasm and impressive knowledge of history that made her insights fascinating. Then there was Jake, who was big on thrillers and mysteries. He had a knack for picking up on the smallest details, often predicting plot twists with uncanny accuracy. And lastly, there was Clara, who had been a schoolmate of mine. I never knew she was into books back then, but joining the club actually brought us closer, and that really made me happy. She was also into fantasy. The more epic, the better. Of course, there were other people, but the couple that I've mentioned are the ones that I have grown a bit close with. Our meetings quickly became the highlight of my week. We would discuss the book of the week or month, maybe, sharing our thoughts and diving into deep conversations that often veered off into other topics. It was just so refreshing to find a space where I could clearly be myself, surrounded by people who just got it. Things were going well, really, until one Friday when a new person joined our group. Her name was Lauren. She was a bit awkward, not very talkative, but she seemed interested in our discussions. We learned that she had just moved into the area, and like us, she had a passion for books. She mentioned that she saw us once while getting coffee at the cafe and then decided to join. At first, Lauren was okay. She wasn't the most vocal member, but she was a good listener. She would nod along to our conversations. However, over the weeks, her behavior started to change. She began to cling to me a little too much, which the others also observed. She would ask why I didn't text her when I arrived at the cafe, or suggest that we meet up more often outside of club meetings. I brushed it off at first, assuming she was just excited to make new friends and connect with people in the club. But then, Lauren started inviting herself to activities that Clara and I planned outside of the club. We didn't mind initially, seeing that it was a chance to be inclusive. But Lauren grew irritable when we did something without her. She would scold me and try to guilt trip me about not being invited. It was unsettling. She would say weird stuff, things like, I thought we were sisters, which felt too intense for our level of acquaintance. I tried explaining to her that while I valued our group friendship, there were boundaries that we had. Yet, she didn't seem to get that, and she just kept pushing, insisting that we were closer than I felt comfortable with. I'm not someone who likes confrontation, but I refuse to be a doormat too. I had to set things straight, and I told her flat out that we weren't as close as she imagined and that she needed to respect boundaries. And after that conversation, it kind of made things bitter for me, so I decided to take a break from the book club. I needed some space to think and breathe. And besides, by that time, I kind of picked up a bit of a new hobby. For anyone interested, it was knitting. So, I decided to spend my Friday nights on that. Anyway, Clara, who I confided in, told me that Lauren also stopped attending the meetings. I didn't think much of it at that time. Maybe she felt awkward too after that confrontation, or maybe life just got busy. But it wasn't any of my business, really. Life resumed in its usual pace, and the incident started fading into the background. But then one afternoon, while I was sitting in my garden enjoying the sun, and of course, reading a book, I saw someone walking on the street across from mine. It was Lauren. She was just standing there looking at me with no expression. It sent chills down my spine because I knew she didn't live anywhere near my neighborhood. Quite the opposite of it, really. Also, how did she know where I lived? Did she follow me? After that, that's when the text started. They ranged from apologies for her behavior to angry messages accusing me of abandoning her. She mentioned how we were supposed to be best friends, sisters even. I mean, what the hell is wrong with this person? And how did she even come to that conclusion? It was unsettling. I just blocked her number, but new ones kept popping up. One day, I came home to find my mom looking concerned. She told me that a friend of mine had stopped by looking for me. She said that my friend looked odd and jittery and just had a weird aura around her that she couldn't quite figure out. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was confused and I asked who. When she said that the girl introduced herself as Lauren, I felt the blood drain from my face, and my mom could tell that something was off and pressed me for more details. I explained everything to her. She listened, then reassured me that we would figure it out together and that she would talk and let my dad know too. A few nights later, as we sat in the living room, a knock echoed through the house. My dad went to check and said that it was a woman at the door, and I could feel my stomach drop. I knew immediately who it was. I peeked, and I confirmed that it was Lauren. I quickly told my dad that it was her, and in a rage, he opened the door. He scolded her, demanding that she leave me alone and stop harassing me. Lauren tried to argue, saying that she just wanted to talk to me, insisting that we were meant to be friends. My dad explained to her that she was making me uncomfortable and that I didn't want to be friends with her. Friends don't harass and make people scared and anxious. She didn't want to listen, though. She didn't want to listen to reason or logic. She started screaming at my dad and cursing at him. It was such a terrifying and odd scene. She was so angry and riled up that you could literally see her red, and the veins on her forehead looked like it was gonna pop out. My dad, now furious, threatened to call the police if she didn't leave and stop. I think that my dad mentioning the police kind of clicked something in her head and finally scared her off. She just stopped, turned around, and walked away. And after that night, she was gone. No more texts, no more surprise visits. It was like a weight had been lifted. It did take a few months for me to relax and feel okay again, and when I finally felt ready, I returned to the book club. We had some new members now, and they were all kind and normal people who simply loved books. No more stalkers or overly obsessed individuals, just genuine fans of reading. I never saw Lauren again, but sometimes, when I'm out late at night walking home, I feel the urge to glance over my shoulder just to be sure that she's not there. It's a habit that I can't quite shake, a small reminder of the unsettling encounter, but one that made me more aware and appreciative of my personal space. This literally just happened, so I'm trying to decide whether or not I should be concerned. My boyfriend came over, and we were talking by the window, and I noticed the guy standing right outside on the sidewalk, but I couldn't tell if he was facing me or not because I didn't have my glasses on. Mind you, I'm on the second floor, so I asked my boyfriend to see if he was looking at us, and he said that he was. I have had my window open these past few days because the weather had been so nice, and my cat likes looking outside. I have a window on the other side of my apartment where he walked towards, so I ran to it to make sure that he wasn't staring into it. The guy then walks over to my neighbors and looks in their windows too. He even got behind the bushes of my neighbors on the first floor to look in. And it reminded me that the day before, I was at my desk and I noticed a man standing still outside my window, just how he was tonight. Not moving, just perfectly still, wearing a hoodie and sweatpants. There is a lot of grass outside my place, so I see people stop to let their dogs pee all the time, but I noticed that he didn't have a dog, and it was just him. And as soon as I started staring back, he walked away. I'm pretty creeped out as I had never had anything like this happen to me. For context, it's almost 5 a.m. and I work late night, so I just got home. I wonder if he was surveying the area for a burglary or if he's just a creep. I'm also a young woman living alone right now. Should I be worried? I'm Francine, female and 22. I grew up in a household where the rules were strict and the boundaries firmly set. My parents, well meaning as they were, believed that limitations were essential for keeping me safe and on the right path. While my friends in high school had their share of freedom, I was usually the one with curfews and a tightly managed schedule. There wasn't much room for fun or exploration, which I often found stifling. When I finally moved out to attend college, a world of possibilities opened up for me. No longer under the watchful eyes of my parents, I was eager to explore and experience everything that I had missed out on. I had always been curious, and now I had the chance to satisfy that curiosity. I tried new things, met new people, and I immersed myself in the vibrant world around me. But sometimes, though, my explorations led me down to paths that weren't the best choices. One particular indulgence was my newfound interest in bars and nightlife. The mix of music, laughter, and the freedom to just be was intoxicating. I fell into a routine of going out frequently, perhaps more than I should have. The thrill of losing myself in the crowd, the energy, and the anonymity was seductive. I soon found myself drinking more than was wise, often waking up with inevitable hangovers and vague memories of the night before. It was during this phase of my life that an incident occurred, one that still haunts me whenever I think back on it. And I had promised myself that I would slow down with the drinking, but that particular night was an exception. A friend was celebrating her birthday, and it was a night meant for partying. The bar was buzzing with life, lights flashed in rhythm with the music, and the air was thick with the scent of alcohol and the warmth of bodies packed together in celebration. As soon as I entered, though, I noticed him. It was a man at the end of the bar, sipping a drink and watching the room with a very peculiar intensity. His gaze lingered a bit too long on me, enough to give me pause. But it was a party, and I dismissed it easily. I was attributing his stare to the usual bar antics. I just joined my friends, diving headfirst into the festivities. We drank, laughed, and danced as hours slipped by unnoticed. 2 hours in, and I was thoroughly enjoying myself when I realized that the man from the bar was now closer, just a few feet away. He approached me with a smile that felt too eager, trying to engage me in conversation and coax me into dancing with him. I politely declined, moving closer to my friends. But he was persistent. He kept hovering nearby, a presence that was really hard to ignore, yet easy enough to avoid amidst the crowded dance floor. Another 2 hours passed, and by then, I was well beyond tipsy. The room swirled around me, and my usual vigilance faded under the haze of alcohol. As the night wore on, I grew tired and a bit bored, craving the quiet of my apartment. So I said my goodbyes, probably a bit slurred, and I stumbled out into the cool night air. The walk home was a blur of thoughts, and the slight chill of sobriety inching back. I was mentally preparing myself for the headache that would greet me in the morning, promising that this would be the last hurrah for a while. My mind was so wrapped in all of these thoughts that I barely noticed the sound at first. But then, it cut through the fog of my mind. They were footsteps, echoing in the quiet night. I told myself it was nothing, just someone else going home or heading to a late-night store. But something in my gut told me to turn around. So I did. And that's when I saw him, the same man from the bar. My heart skipped a beat, the alcohol-induced warmth vanishing in an instant. He was following me, and there was no mistaking his intent. Without hesitation, I ran. I think adrenaline overpowered the remnants of alcohol in my system, and I sprinted like I have never before. I think the suddenness of my reaction caught him off guard, because it took a moment before I heard his footsteps quicken after me. My mind raced fast as my feet, and my keys already clutched in my hand, I was mentally rehearsing how to unlock the door as quickly as possible. Reaching my building felt like reaching the finish line of a marathon. I fumbled with the lock, but my frantic practice paid off. I was inside, the door slammed and locked behind me, and my lungs burning from the effort. I collapsed onto the floor, heart pounding in my chest, and I thought that I can finally relax. Of course not. Seconds later, I heard the footsteps approach, followed by fist pounding on my door. He was outside, shouting that he just wanted to talk. The banging and the shouting continued, and my fear mounting with every second. I keep shouting back for him to go away, but he wouldn't listen. My mind then snapped into focus. I needed help. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. I hadn't even connected with an operator when the sound of sirens pierced the night air. I heard him stop, then the rapid thud of footsteps as he bolted. A commotion followed, and the sounds of officers arriving and voices raised outside. I was peering through the peephole, and I saw the man being apprehended and being pushed into the back of a police car. Relief washed over me. My neighbor was also outside, clearly worried after witnessing the commotion. It turned out that they had still been awake, and they heard everything, and they were the ones that called the police. Lucky for me, the police were already patrolling nearby. I stepped outside to talk to the officers, explaining the evening's events as best as I could remember. They took statements from my neighbors, confirming what they had heard as the officers led the man away. I felt a complex swirl of emotions, relief and fear, and sobering clarity about the choices that I had been making. I heard later on that the man was charged, though I never learned the specifics. What I did know was that this experience left a lasting impression. It was a wake-up call and a reminder of the dangers lurking in seemingly harmless places. My explorations had taken me down a path that I hadn't anticipated, and it was time to change course. Looking back, I am grateful for the chain of events that helped me that night. Him being caught off guard, my neighbor for being awake and calling the police, and the police patrolling around and being near. It's a story I just share now, not with fear but with the hope that it serves as a cautionary tale of awareness to everyone out there. And yeah, I won't be drinking and bar hopping for a while. In my early days after graduating college, money was tight, so I had to rent an apartment with a stranger. My new roommate's name was Miguel. He seemed easy enough to get along with. He didn't talk too much and had a noticeable accent. One of the appealing features of the apartment was that my room was already furnished. It had a twin-sized bed tucked in one corner, and a nice-sized dresser, a closet, and a bookshelf in another corner. There was one thing, though, that I found a bit odd. On the bookshelf, there were a bunch of books arranged neatly, but one in particular caught my eye. It was an old dusty novel placed prominently on the shelf. When I asked Miguel about the books, he laughed heartily and said that his room had the same setup. He recommended leaving everything as it was to respect the landlord. But other than that brief exchange, I didn't talk much with Miguel that first day. I just focused on unpacking my clothes and my supplies and then setting up my TV. That night, as I lay in bed watching TV, I thought I heard something. It was a brief noise but definitely audible, like some kind of small electronic component. I chalked it up to being a house noise, and I continued to watch my show. The next day, Miguel wasn't home all day. I didn't know if he had a job, but I assumed he was working. And that night, as I watched TV in my room, I heard the front door open and Miguel walked through the hall to his room before shutting the door. Later, as I changed into my pajamas, I heard the same sound from the night before. With the TV off, I heard it much clearer this time. It was definitely some kind of electronic device, but I didn't know what it was or where it was coming from. Still, it didn't seem like a big deal, so I got into my bed. I started reading my current book, and eventually I drifted off to sleep. The next day, when I came home from work, I saw Miguel. He asked me what book I was reading. At first, I didn't understand the question, but then he said that he was talking about the book that I was reading in my room. I looked at him, confused, and asked how he knew I was reading a book. He explained that he went into my room to retrieve something that he had left there, and then he noticed the book. I politely asked him not to enter my room again, but unfortunately, my door didn't have a lock, so I couldn't stop him when I wasn't home. That night, as I reached under my bed to grab my book, I paused, and I wondered how Miguel could have seen it when I kept it under the bed. This thought creeped me out. I suddenly wasn't in the mood to read anymore. I looked around the room, feeling uneasy, and then my eyes landed on that prominent book on the shelf. It was angled just right to face my bed, and a scary thought gripped me. I stood up, walked over to the shelf. I picked up the book, and I examined it closely. My heart skipped a beat when I realized that there was a camera hidden in the spine of the book, peeking through a tiny hole. I immediately threw the book into the corner of the room, and I rushed to Miguel's door trying to open it. His door had a lock because it wouldn't budge, but I knew he was inside. I pounded on the door, shouting his name, but he wouldn't answer. I saw the light seeping in from under the door go dark, as I assumed that he turned it off. I went back to my room and I called the landlord, explaining everything and telling him that I was leaving immediately. I insisted that I had a valid reason to void the contract. I packed a few belongings that I had brought and I loaded them into my car, driving away that very night and never to return. Surprisingly, the landlord never contacted me to collect the rent for those few days that I stayed there. And since that night, I've developed an aversion to bookshelves, especially those books that seem to stare back at me. I always feel the urge to turn them away or hide them so they aren't facing me. Living with a roommate has its ups and downs, but for the most part, it's been a great experience. My current roommate, Mark, and I have been sharing this apartment for about a year now. We get along well and have a mutual respect for each other's space, and even hang out together sometimes. It's a comfortable arrangement that suits both of us. However, the comfort of our living situation took a strange turn when his girlfriend, Jen, came into the picture. Jen seemed nice enough when I first met her. She was friendly, and we exchanged pleasantries whenever she came over to visit Mark. At first, her presence barely registered on my radar. She was polite, engaging enough in small talk, and respectful of our shared space. I often saw her around on weekends or during the evenings, spending time with Mark in his room or watching movies in our living room. As is the case with many new relationships, Mark and Jen were spending a lot of time together. She became a regular fixture in our apartment, which was really fine by me. I didn't mind her being around, and I was happy for Mark. It was good to see him enjoying himself. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to notice subtle changes in the way Jen interacted with me. It started with small things. At first, I thought I was imagining them, little moments that felt off but were hard to pin down. Like how she would always linger in the kitchen when I was preparing meals, striking up conversations that seemed to stretch on. Or how she began showing a keen interest in my schedule, casually asking questions about my work hours or my plans for the weekend. I just brushed it off as friendly curiosity. And over time, her presence began to expand into my personal space. She started leaving small items around the apartment, her books on the coffee table, a sweater thrown over the back of a chair, her shoes near the door. It was as if she was marking her territory, intruding into the space that Mark and I shared. Still, I thought it might just be the natural progression of her relationship with Mark. Maybe she was just getting more comfortable. But then, Jen started turning up in places that I frequented around town. I would see her at my regular coffee shop during my usual morning stop for caffeine. This coffee shop is near my workplace. She would wave and smile, and always managing to find a moment to chat. When I began seeing her in the anime shop that I often browsed, I started to feel a bit uneasy. The reason why, it's because she and Mark has never shown any interest in animated shows or films. And when I brought that up a couple of months ago, they both said that it's just not their thing. So I didn't understand why she was in the shop with me. Me meeting her in other places might be a coincidence because those are common places. Say the grocery store, a coffee shop, a gym maybe, I don't know, a park. But in an anime shop in which she wasn't interested in, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me, or rather tracking my movements. Also to add, whenever by chance we meet in those places, she's always alone and Mark is never with her. This odd pattern of behavior carried on for months, and despite my growing discomfort, I didn't want to say anything to Mark. I didn't want to come off as paranoid or cause any unnecessary tension in our living arrangement. I kept telling myself that I was just overreacting, that it was all in my head. But as time went on, Jen's presence became increasingly intrusive. It was as if she started orchestrating ways to be alone with me in the apartment. Whenever Mark was out, she'd conveniently drop by, claiming that she forgot something, or just wanted to hang out until he got back. These visits became more frequent, and her conversation shifted from small talk to more personal topics. She started asking questions about my family, my childhood, my plans for the future. Her interest in my life felt disproportionately intense. It was concerning. The conversations often felt like probing sessions, as though she was gathering information. I became acutely aware of her presence, always feeling on edge whenever she was around. One particular evening, I found myself alone in the apartment. Mark had mentioned earlier that he would be out late, and as I settled in to watch a movie, Jen let herself in using the spare key Mark had given her. I didn't even know he gave her one. She greeted me with a familiar smile, but there was something else in her eyes, an intensity that made me uneasy. She sat down on the couch, far closer than necessary, and started chatting as if it were perfectly normal for us to hang out alone. I was polite but brief. I didn't want to encourage any more familiarity than necessary. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized. It might just be in my head, but I noticed that she kept moving and kept inching closer. When she was close enough, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, told her good night, and then went to bed. That night, I barely slept though. I was just laying on my bed with my mind and my eyes awake. Every creak and groan of the apartment set my nerves on edge. I found myself lying awake, replaying every interaction with Jen, trying to make sense of her behavior. It was unsettling, and I knew that I had to address it somehow. The following day, I decided to talk to Mark about how Jen had been acting. I didn't want to accuse her of anything outright, but I needed to voice my concerns. When I brought it up, Mark seemed surprised. He assured me that Jen was just friendly and probably trying to get to know me better as his friend. His reaction left me feeling unsure about whether I was making a big deal out of nothing. As the weeks passed, Jen's behavior didn't let up. In fact, it seemed to escalate. She began leaving notes around the apartment, little messages that felt more intimate than friendly. Things like, "I hope you have a great day," or "We should hang out more." It was perplexing and increasingly uncomfortable. You might think, well, maybe she was leaving it for her boyfriend. Um, on my door? On my stuff? I don't know about that. One weekend, I decided to take a short trip out of town to clear my head. When I returned, I found that some of my personal belongings had been moved. Nothing was missing, but things weren't as I'd left them. Books were rearranged, my bed slightly unmade, and a sweater that I'd left draped over a chair was now folded neatly on my bed. I confronted Mark about it, but he insisted that he hadn't been in my room and hadn't noticed anything unusual. I couldn't help but suspect that Jen had been snooping around, but without proof, I felt stuck. The situation reached a tipping point when I received a package addressed to me without no sender information. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of me, some taken at the apartment, others clearly snapped while I was out around town. And seeing my life documented like that made my skin crawl. It was a violation of privacy that I hadn't anticipated, and it left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. That night, I locked my bedroom door. It's a habit that I hadn't felt the need for before. I sat in bed, with my heart racing, trying to figure out my next move. I needed to find a way to confront Jen, to set boundaries. I was eager to resolve the situation. I planned to speak with Jen and Mark together. I wanted to lay everything out and express how uncomfortable I was with the whole situation. The opportunity arose when Mark invited Jen over for dinner. As we sat around the table, I tried to broach the subject, explaining how I felt uneasy with her frequent visits and the personal nature of her interactions with me. I had hoped to keep it constructive. Jen, however, seemed unfazed by my concerns. She brushed them off with a laugh, claiming that she was just being funny and friendly, and lamenting how misunderstood her intentions were. Mark, caught between us, tried to mediate, but I could see that he was struggling to grasp the gravity of the situation. It was like he was a bit disturbed by the things he is discovering about his girlfriend, but also not being able to fully believe me since I do not have concrete proof. Just to note, I haven't showed him the album yet, and for some reason, I didn't think of showing it at that time. Well, despite our conversation, nothing really changed. Jen continued her intrusive behavior, seemingly undeterred by my attempts to set boundaries. I felt trapped in my own home. I was constantly on edge, wondering when she would next appear and what she would do. I realized that I needed to take a more decisive action. I started documenting every interaction every suspicious occurrence, building a case to support the unease that I felt. I took and kept the note she left, and I noted down every single coincidence, let's just call that I would meet her outside. Because I was considering involving authorities, but of course without a clear evidence of wrongdoing, I knew my claims might not be taken seriously, so I was documenting everything. In the meantime, I made changes to secure my space. I added locks to my bedroom door, I kept my personal items out of common areas, and I avoided leaving anything important unattended. I also made a habit of staying in my room and not hanging out when Jen was over. It helped ease my anxiety, but it didn't really solve the underlying issue. Finally, I reached a breaking point. I was getting tired. I couldn't endure the relentless intrusion any longer. I sat down with Mark privately, and I laid everything out, detailing every unsettling moment, every instance of overstepping personal boundaries. I showed him my notes, I showed him the notes she wrote, and I showed him the album. I needed him to understand how serious the situation had become. This time, Mark actually listened. The clarity and detail in my account seemed to finally make him see the situation from my perspective. He promised to talk to Jen and ensure that she respected my space and privacy. Also, he wanted to know why she was doing that. Days passed, and Jen hasn't visited the apartment. I slowly started to feel a semblance of relief, though I remained vigilant. But Mark assured me that he had spoken to her, and while I didn't know the details of their conversation, or even if they're still together or not, something had evidently changed. As I reflect on this experience, I realized how important it is to trust your instincts and assert your boundaries. Living in fear isn't living at all. In the end, peace returned to my apartment, and I just want to say thank you for reading my story. My cat recently passed away, and I was devastated. For days, I couldn't stop crying or thinking about her. One day, my sister, who lives in a nearby city, called me about a 10-day-old stray kitten that she found next to its dead mother near a pile of garbage. She suggested that we adopt the kitten, thinking that it might help ease my grief while giving the tiny creature a chance at a better life. At first, I was uncomfortable with the idea. The pain of losing my cat was still fresh, and I had decided never to keep another cat again. My sister understood, but proposed a temporary solution. We could keep the kitten for a few days until she found it a new home. I reluctantly agreed, knowing that I couldn't let the poor thing starve to death. The only problem was that my sister lived 45 kilometers away in a hostel, and getting there wasn't easy. Driving my scooter on the highway was too dangerous, so I decided to take a local train. The journey would involve 5 stops, with my destination being Bilay Nagar, a small area within the city of Bilay. Local trains in my state are unreserved and often crowded, especially during morning and evening hours. So, to avoid the rush, I chose a noon train that departed at 12:30 p.m. I arrived at the station early, hoping to find a comfortable seat, and I was relieved to see that the train was moderately crowded. I settled into a seat next to a man traveling with his wife. As the train prepared to depart, a slim, bearded man with a large bag boarded and took the seat beside me. I silently hoped that he was a normal passenger, but unfortunately, my prayers went unanswered. I wasn't used to traveling alone, so I was already feeling uneasy. At first, everything seemed fine. To pass the time, I opened my phone and I began playing chess against a bot. And then, I overheard the bearded man's phone conversation. He said, "Yes, I got caught, but I'm out on bail now. I'll finish the job this time." My hands froze. Was I sitting next to a criminal? The man sitting across from me had also overheard the conversation and exchanged a nervous glance with me. His expression mirrored my own fear. I tried to ignore it, reasoning that the man was unlikely to harm me in a crowded train. But he kept making suspicious calls, casually discussing things that sounded straight out of a crime novel. At one point, he mentioned heading to Durg, the station after Bilay Nagar, for a court appearance. My unease grew when I noticed him openly staring at my phone. Not even trying to be discreet about it. I was too scared to confront him or move to another seat, fearing that he might react badly. After what felt like forever, he finally stopped taking calls and struck up a conversation. "This game takes a lot of brain, doesn't it?" he said, referring to the chess app. I smiled awkwardly and I looked away, praying that he wouldn't continue talking. And thankfully, he didn't. The rest of the journey was tense. He kept brushing his leg against mine and glancing at me with a piercing gaze. I tried my best to focus on my game and ignore him. And the entire time, I couldn't stop thinking about the worst possibilities. What if he followed me? What if he attacked me? Or worse, what if he raped me? The thoughts consumed me until the train finally reached Bilay Nagar. After I got off the train, I noticed him getting off as well. I was confused, but I decided not to dwell on it. Bilay Nagar is only about 5 kilometers from Durg, so I assumed that he might have business nearby. I stood on the platform, waiting for my sister to arrive. I called her, but she didn't pick up. I figured she was driving and decided to wait. And then, I saw the man again standing at a distance and staring directly at me. When he noticed that I had seen him, he walked away toward the front side of the station. Relieved, I called my sister again and this time she answered. She told me that she was waiting at the back exit of the station. I hurried there and I was relieved to find her. She handed me the kitten, which was so tiny that it fit in the palm of my hand. I placed it in a small basket that I had brought along. We decided to stay at the station until my return train at around 2:20 p.m. I told my sister about the creepy man, but she just laughed it off, saying that he was probably just trying to scare me. Her reaction irritated me, but I just let it go. But then, I saw him again. This time, on the walking bridge, heading toward the back exit. I pointed him out to my sister, who dismissed it as a coincidence, and I tried to do the same, thinking that he might have gotten off at the wrong station and was waiting for the next train to Durg. When my train arrived, I said goodbye to my sister and I boarded with a kitten. The train was so crowded, so I stood by the door. And about 45 minutes later, just 2 stops away from my destination, I spotted the man again. He walked through the crowd and stood directly in front of me, staring. And I ignored him, but my anxiety skyrocketed. As the train approached my station, he leaned closer and asked about the basket. "What's inside?" he inquired. I replied, a kitten," and explained that my sister had rescued it. He smiled and said, "It's rare to meet good people like you." The train stopped and I quickly got off without responding. Instead of exiting through the main station gates, I headed to the local train parking area, about 1.5 kilometers away where I had left my scooter. No one usually walks through that section unless they have a vehicle parked there. And as I walked, I realized that the man was still following me. My heart raced as I quickened my pace, and so did he. By the time that I reached my scooter, I was trembling with fear. He even followed me to the parking lot. I started my scooter, and I sped away, taking a longer route through secluded valleys to avoid traffic. And thankfully, I never saw him again. His face still haunts me, and I haven't traveled alone since, and I am terrified of the idea. That 3-hour ordeal was the scariest experience of my life. Let me know if you guys think that I was just overthinking stuff, or share your thoughts with me about what you guys think of my experience. I had always considered myself a pretty ordinary person, living a quiet life in a small town with my boyfriend Jason. We'd been together a couple of years and everything was going smoothly. That was until this strange encounter turned my world upside down. About a month ago, Jason came home from work looking a bit rattled. This wasn't like him. He's usually the calm and collected type. I asked him what was up, and after some hesitation, he told me about a man who had come into his workplace that day. The man had asked to speak with him directly, which wasn't entirely out of the ordinary, as my boyfriend managed customer service at a local hardware store. But the conversation that followed was anything but normal. The man, whom Jason described as scruffy and intense with an unsettling demeanor, asked, "Are you Jason?" When he confirmed, the man said something that sent chills down my spine. "Huh, I just wanted to meet the guy who's with the girl that I proposed to." Jason, thinking that it must be a mistake, asked who he was talking about. And then the man gave my full name. I was floored. Jason, trying to keep things polite, asked for the guy's name so he could tell me who stopped by. Instead, the man just stared at him with a death glare before turning and walking away without another word. As my partner recounted this to me, I could tell that it left him shaken. He's not easily intimidated, but something about the encounter had disturbed him deeply. My immediate reaction was confusion. As far as I knew, there was no one who could have possibly fit that description in my life. I've only had one person ever propose to me, and Jason had met him before. It was just a brief high school romance that ended amicably, and I didn't recognize the man from his description. Over the next few days, I racked my brain trying to think of anyone who remotely fits the scenario. I thought through friends of friends, old classmates, even acquaintances from social gatherings. But nothing and no one really clicked to me. Jason assured me none of these people matched the man he saw. Just as I was starting to chalk it up to someone with a bizarre mix-up, I noticed something unsettling. My dad's bag was missing from my car. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but the thing is, I only ever leave my car unlocked at home. It's an unspoken rule in our quiet neighborhood. Everyone knows everyone, and thefts are rare. Besides, my car had much more valuable items than a bag of worn-out shoes and leotards. Why would someone steal that? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I'd accidentally left the car unlocked somewhere else. But it didn't add up, and a knot of unease began to twist in my stomach. Was it possible that the man from Jason's work had something to do with this? As days turned into weeks, my anxiety grew, and I started noticing small strange occurrences around our house. Objects slightly out of place, the feeling of being watched, odd sounds at night. And I mentioned it to Jason, who agreed that we should be more vigilant. We started double-checking locks and keeping a lookout for any unusual activity. One evening, as we were getting ready to head out for a dinner date, I glimpsed a shadowy figure standing just beyond the circle of light cast by our porch lamp. My heart skipped a beat. I nudged Jason, who instantly turned to see, but by the time that he looked, the figure was gone. I tried to shake it off as paranoia, but deep down, I couldn't dismiss the possibility that it was the same man lurking. But time passed, and with no further incidents, I convinced myself to move on. Until one night, when I was home alone since my boyfriend had to work late, I had settled into the couch with a movie and also a glass of wine. Halfway through, the power suddenly flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I froze, my mind racing through all the horror movie scenarios that I have ever seen. And gathering my courage, I reached for my phone to use the flashlight and then checked the circuit breaker. As I moved through the hallway, I heard a soft, deliberate tapping at the window, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. Peering through the curtains, my heart pounded as I saw the same shadowy figure standing in the yard, looking directly at me. Panic surged through me, and I called Jason immediately, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. He promised to drive back as fast as he could, and then told me to hang up and call the police. It felt like an eternity before I saw the familiar flash of the police lights. Jason also arrived shortly after, and together they scanned the yard. But the figure was gone, leaving only footprints in the soft soil. The police took a report and promised to patrol the area more frequently, but I could see in their eyes that they thought that it might just be nerves or an overactive imagination. But seriously? Imagination my ass, there were footprints. I wish I could say that that was the end and that the presence of the police scared them off, but it wasn't. Though we never saw the shadowy figure again, I continued to receive mysterious unsigned notes on my doorstep. They were filled with cryptic messages about knowing me and wanting to talk, sometimes even referring to the proposal that never happened. The notes were chilling, as if it was written by someone who knew my life intimately. I tried to contact the police again, but they said that the notes were not enough as proof or help to find whoever was doing this. It was just so unbearable that I finally ended up begging my boyfriend to move places. And we did find a new place in a different part of town, hoping that distance would finally sever whatever connection the stranger thought he had with me. And since moving, the incidents have stopped and life has returned to a semblance of normalcy. I'm not sure what happened, if they lost interest, if they couldn't find me, if it was a neighbor or something. I'm just glad that it stopped. So to the stranger who disrupted my peace and left me questioning my safety, let's never meet again. As a child, I traveled a lot with my mother to different tourist places in our country and abroad. We celebrated that New Year's Eve in Austria, and I was 12 years old at that time. That day, we were at the Kunsthistorisches Museum, one of the most famous places in Vienna, especially for tourists like us. However, I remember that this rendezvous was very tiring for me. When we were at the very bottom of the museum, my mom said she wanted to go to the bathroom and asked me if I wanted to go to the store afterwards before leaving. I replied that I didn't. I told her that I would wait for her at the bench in front of the wardrobe until she did her business. She was absent for a few minutes when a very tall man with creepy smile from one ear to another and wild, wide open eyes approached me when I was sitting there. He started talking to me, and I thought he asked me some questions, but he was speaking German and I didn't understand what he was saying to me. I replied to him that I didn't know the language, which infuriated him. He touched my shoulder and changed his voice from affectionate to aggressive. His English was so-so, as was mine, but he tried to convince me that I do really speak German and that I try to fool him. At this point, my mom came back and approached the man in surprise. He was clearly frightened, quickly waved at me, and fastly walked out of the museum. My mother asked me what he wanted, but I didn't know what to say to her, for I understood nothing of his speech except a complaint that I did not answer him in German. There was also an elderly couple who were around who overlooked all the encounter. I approached them and asked them what the man was trying to tell me. The woman just replied something that it doesn't really matter and that the man was very strange and I should be really careful. Who knows what would have happened if my mom hadn't shown up on time. I have always been a huge fan of anime and manga. Growing up in the Midwest, where not many people shared my passion. So, at 24, I decided that it was finally time to attend one of the larger anime conventions in my area. Two of my closest friends, Emily and Sarah, were equally excited, so we planned a road trip to experience the colorful spectacle together. And the first day of the convention was everything that I hoped it would be: vibrant costumes, bustling booths, and the contagious energy of fellow fans. We wandered the expansive halls, taking in the sights and snapping photos with cosplayers who brought our favorite characters to life. It felt like stepping into another world, a place where I could truly be myself. Well, that happiness was short-lived though. As I was browsing through a booth filled with collectibles, a man suddenly approached me with an unsettling eagerness. He seemed out of place among the crowd of anime enthusiasts. He had a tiny hat perched on his head that caught my eye as he introduced himself casually. Let's call him Nick. Nick claimed to be a guest at the convention, though I had no idea who he was. He didn't seem like someone who would be into anime or manga, which made me question his presence there. I tried to brush off my unease, but as he talked, his eyes never left mine, making me feel exposed. Nick attempted small talk, asking if I liked to cosplay. With an awkward laugh, I joked that I could probably dress up as a green M&M since I was proud of my legs. And to my surprise, he latched onto the idea with disturbing enthusiasm. He suggested that I do it for him. His gaze lingered a little too long, making my skin crawl. I quickly excused myself, rejoining Emily and Sarah, hoping that that was the end of it. But throughout the 3 days of the convention, Nick seemed to pop up wherever I went. It was like he had some uncanny ability to track me down in the throng of people. His persistence only grew more unnerving with each encounter. And what made it worse was the fact that Nick had a girlfriend at the convention. I saw her a few times, always busy with her own activities. Nick seemed to take advantage of her distractions, trying to flirt with me whenever she wasn't around. It felt wrong and made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. At one point, I tried to bring up his girlfriend in the conversation, hoping that it would deter him. I asked if she would be upset that he was showing interest in someone else. He waved it off, saying that he could convince her to be okay with it, and bizarrely referred to her as a ladyboy. His complete disregard for her feelings was alarming. Every time he found me, I felt trapped. The convention's atmosphere, once filled with excitement, actually turned suffocating. I started to dread walking through the halls, fearing that I would see his tiny hat bobbing toward me. It might not sound like classic stalking, but his presence was invasive enough to make me feel like I was under constant watch. After the convention, I looked him up out of curiosity. Turns out, Nick attended the 3 major conventions in my area every single year. The thought of running into him again filled me with so much dread, so I reluctantly decided to skip any future cons, prioritizing my peace of mind. So, to Nick, the man with a tiny hat and unsettling presence who followed me for 3 days during the anime convention, I hope that I never see you again. And also, I hope your girlfriend breaks up with you, asshole. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. About a year ago, I was added by a username on Snapchat that seemed vaguely familiar. You know how it is. Sometimes you see a name and can't quite place it, but it still rings a bell. So, being the curious person that I am, I accepted the request. A week went by without any interaction, which was pretty normal. But then one day, I received a message from this account. My curiosity turned to shock when I opened it and a full-on explicit photo stared back at me. Grossed out and angry, I immediately blocked the account, and I thought that that would be the end of it, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Just a few days later, I received another friend request from another username on Snapchat, this time a girl's name. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me once again. I accepted the request, only to be met with a long chatty message claiming to be from someone who attended my school. They said that they were too shy to approach me in person. Now, I'm currently in a rigorous master's program in biomedical science at a private school. And trust me, no one there has time for childish games, so I was skeptical. I questioned if this was the same person who had sent the earlier obnoxious photo. They admitted it, chalking their behavior up to being drunk and high. I wasn't exactly in a forgiving mood, especially when they immediately shifted gears and started trying to initiate sexting. Enough was enough. I told them to leave me alone, and I blocked them once more. But it didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, the harassment escalated. I noticed they were stalking my social media too. They sent messages detailing outfits that I'd worn recently, and I realized with discomfort that these were not details visible in any photos online. They were either watching me in person or had access to someone who was. And then the screenshots started. Photos from my Instagram, stories from my sister's profile, all saved and sent back to me through various new fake accounts. It was beyond creepy. They even started reaching out to people that I knew, dragging them into this bizarre twisted game. The relentless barrage of new accounts in Snapchat, Instagram, even a Facebook request was exhausting. I was starting to feel paranoid, jumping at shadows and suspicious of everyone around me. In a small, closely knit school environment, it was easy to feel claustrophobic. Each time I blocked one account, another would appear. I reported them all, but those platforms seemed powerless to stop the pervasive harassment. My mind spiraled with questions. Was it someone from my classes? Or a stranger who'd seen me on campus? The idea that I could unknowingly be interacting with this person in real life was terrifying. I tried seeking advice. I reached out to friends, scoured online forums, and even considered hiring a private investigator. But without any concrete information or a consistent username, it felt like searching for a ghost. I became more vigilant in my daily routines, scanning each room for familiar faces, watching for anyone who seemed overly interested. Yet no one stood out, and that was the most unsettling part. The breaking point came one night while studying late at the library. Lost in my notes, I glanced at my phone to find a new message from yet another unfamiliar account. This time, it was a photo of me sitting at my desk, taken just moments before. My blood ran cold, my heart was pounding, and I gathered my things and then left the library. I was scanning the room for anyone who seemed out of place. The ride home was a blur of anxiety and fear. I had no idea who was following me or how they always seemed to know where I was. At home, I called my sister, and I confided in her the extent of the stalker's behavior. She urged me to go to the police, something that I had been really hesitant to do so, because I was thinking that it might blow over. But the fear had become too real and too tangible, so I took her advice and I went to the police. They were sympathetic, but they were honest about their limited ability to track online harassment. Still, they promised to increase patrols around the campus in my neighborhood. It was a little comfort, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. I decided to take matters into my own hands, so I reached out to a cybersecurity expert for help. They advised tightening my privacy settings, limiting what I shared online, and gave me tools to trace any future messages. And with their help, I began painstakingly process locking down my digital footprint. The messages and fake accounts eventually dwindled, but the unease remained since I had no idea who the person was. I had to be vigilant. I was constantly questioning the motives of those around me, and I changed my routines often. I never stuck to patterns, and I always made sure that someone knew where I was. Months passed, and the stalker slowly receded. I really never discovered who my stalker was, and the mystery lingered like an unsolved puzzle. And to this day, I remain cautious in my online interactions, and to the anonymous phantom who tried to disrupt my life, I hope we never meet. Let's keep it that way. I'm not quite sure if this fits here, because it was a bit of a strange situation, but here goes. I used to get bullied, and so did pretty much all of my friends. I have witnessed some of it, and I couldn't believe how cruel and degrading people could be. It wasn't a shock when Sally, my best friend, brought up a boy that she had made friends with in a conversation. We were on a holiday at that time, and I already knew this kid. He was quiet, pretty smart, awkward, and clearly sad. She explained how he got bullied for his voice and how his ex-girlfriend was spreading rumors that he was faking a condition and that he didn't really sound like that. She wanted to know if she could let him sit with us at lunch because he usually didn't have anyone to sit with. I obviously agreed to it, not really knowing that much about him. I had talked to him a couple of times before, and he seemed pretty happy about having someone to talk to. But I couldn't see any personality when I talked to him. Everything he did just seemed odd, like it wasn't really him. I know that sounds weird, but that's how I felt. His name was Samuel, an unusual name, but quite nice. He seemed like a kind person, but he still had that weird feeling about him. After a while of talking to him, Sally and I got to know him better. He liked dark jokes, much like me, and he was really into Doctor Who. None of us really knew much about it, but we still let him talk about his interest so that he would feel more comfortable around us. He talked a lot, and I didn't even realize that he had feelings for Sally until he asked me if she likes Harry Potter and what her favorite colors are. She soon realized this too, but she had just gotten over a boy, so she made it clear that she wasn't interested. He wouldn't leave her alone though. He was always next to her, somewhere nearby, and it started to get to her, and she hated it. She felt as though she couldn't be alone, so I tried to do something about it. I wanted to help, so I turned his attention from her to me. I started hanging out with him more often, listening to his terrible, unfunny jokes, to his strange interest, to everything that he said. I tried to make it seem like I wanted to be there, even though at this point, I really didn't. I wanted to get away from him. He was beginning to tire me out emotionally, with him constantly being there somewhere near me. He wouldn't leave me alone. He even walked home with me and my friend Grace, despite the fact that he walks in the opposite way to get to his house. At one point, I was going through a particularly hard time, and being desperate for help and someone to talk to, I turned to him. I knew that it was the wrong move, but desperation led me to make that move. He asked to video call me, so I agreed. I was crying. He tried to calm me down, and eventually he did. And he just started making his horrible jokes and talking about things I like and stuff he actually shouldn't have known about. But I didn't think of it at that time because I wanted someone to make me laugh. Laughter got me through a lot of hard times, you know. I began to think that he wasn't so bad after all, and that we just didn't like him for what he did to Sally. But maybe he wasn't like that. I started talking to him through video almost every day after school, and I noticed him being around more often. One day, he said he needed to tell me something, which turned out to be his confession. He confessed that he had a crush on me, but I had to go because my mom wanted to watch a movie. When I returned, I had about 10 video and voice messages from him. All of them were him apologizing because he apparently thought that I hadn't actually left to go watch a movie, but was instead avoiding him because of what he told me. I felt horrible. I didn't mean to upset him. He was crying, and I explained that I really went to watch a movie, and that's why I was gone. Fortunately, he understood. After a while of hanging out with him, I began to get tired of him again, with him constantly being there, and now also knowing that he was crushing on me. I looked back to the situation with Sally and began to spot the same things in our friendship. He got clingy and just downright annoying. I politely explained to him that I didn't want to sit with him at lunch anymore, but he still insisted that I sat with him. I declined, and I just told him to go away every time he approached our table. One particular incident made me lose all respect for him though. He would sometimes randomly walk with me and Grace, as I mentioned before, but this time it was different. Outside was a thick mist, but even I could see in it, and according to my friends who have looked through my glasses, I am technically blind. He didn't wear glasses or contacts because there is nothing wrong with his eyes. Well, we walked all the way to Grace's house and we said our goodbyes. I often stayed at her house after school and we would watch weird videos that we found in her recommended. About an hour into me being there, we hear a knock at the door, and she goes to answer it thinking it's her parents. Well, needless to say, it wasn't her parents. It was Samuel. I heard his voice and dropped to the floor, hoping that he hadn't seen me. After a long while of silence, I proceeded to army crawl over to the door to see if he was still there. And lo and behold, he was. "Hello?" His voice echoed in my mind at this point, and I began to crawl back. I'm lost. I can't find my house. Can you guys help me?" he asked. Liar. How could he possibly not know where his house is? And it's not like I knew where it was. I'd never been there. He persisted and continued to knock on Grace's door. She was hiding in the living room. We came to a decision that we would hide in the conservatory until he goes away, and so we did. So time passed before Grace chose to climb onto a desk to see if he was still there. I jumped back when she yelped and stumbled off the desk, almost knocking me over. She turned to look at me and then pointed in the direction that she was looking at. "He's still there. He was looking directly at me and he fucking waved at me," she whispered. "No way," I whispered back. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't happening. We weren't trapped by him. He wasn't outside. This was all just a joke or something. But Grace's face looked so scared and in a way angry as well. I awkwardly got my stuff and I told her that I was going to head out to get him the hell away from her house. She reluctantly agreed and I left with him. I offered to walk him down to the shop and let him go from there, but he refused to let me leave. He told me that he couldn't see very well and that he almost got hit by a car earlier. Bullshit. This boy had boasted many times about how good his eyesight was. There was no way that he suddenly couldn't see. Despite his apparent sight problem, he flawlessly led me to his house. At this point, I was in an area completely unknown to me, and I began to worry. How would I get home? It was already dark and there was no way that I was going to wander an area that I have never been in, especially in the dark. Who knows what kind of creeps could have been hiding out there? I brought this up to him, and he assured me that him and his mom would drop me off. I didn't want that. I didn't want him to know where I lived. With how he was acting, I was fully convinced that he would try to pull something. I suffer from symptoms of schizophrenia, and this didn't at all make it better for me. I felt unbelievably unsafe at that moment, and I wish that I hadn't left Grace's and explained it to my mom later. I was sure that she would understand. Countless minutes dragged on as I sat and waited in his room surrounded by his cats. They were the only thing keeping me from snapping and just trying to make my way back home on my own. And soon enough, his mom arrived and agreed to drop me off. Seeing how distressed I looked, she offered me some chocolates and assured me that I would be just fine. She must have thought that she was the problem. It wasn't her. He was in the car, and he would now know where I lived. I wanted to cry. This brought back so many horrible memories with stalkers that I had in the past. He was so much like all of them. His eyes gave me that horrible feeling of hopelessness, and I hated it. After they dropped me off at my house, I went to my mom and I broke out in tears. I couldn't take it anymore. He went too far this time, and my mom said that she was going to report him for that, because he wasn't going to cause me this much stress and then get away with it. I agreed at that time, but soon after, I asked my mom to just forget it. Maybe this would all go away. It didn't. The next day, I told him that I wasn't allowed to talk to him anymore because my mom told me not to, but he still refused to leave me alone. I obviously got mad due to having enough of his shit, and I had a complete mental breakdown saying that I was going to get Tim, my boyfriend, on him because I was done. Grace and Felicity, who is my other friend, tried to take me to one of our most trusted teachers. But a few other teachers, despite seeing me cry hysterically, refused to let us through because she probably won't be able to help. So, we found another teacher and explained the whole situation to her. She assured me that she would speak with him and attempt to get this sorted. Throughout the entirety of my geography class, I was having major anxiety, but I calmed down a bit in math. When lunch came about, I saw Grace standing next to the door holding Samuel's stuff. "What the hell is this about?" I questioned. "I don't know. He just dumped it on me and left, Now he's in the toilet," she told me. Then one of my male friends who knew about the situation, Chad, approached us and offered to take his stuff while we leave. I thanked him a million times, and then we hurried away. We reached the hall and sat down at the table where Sally and Felicity were, and everything seemed fine. Until he showed up again. He seemed pretty angry, so I assumed that the teacher we spoke to had talked to him. I began to panic, thinking that this wouldn't end well and that we were all in danger. Then, Rafida, another close friend, walked over to him, attempting to save me from an episode. She told him that I don't feel all right and that he should probably go. But he completely ignored her and asked me if I wanted food. I nervously shook my head, and he started saying that he was going to pass out and that he needs to sit down. Rafida calmly told him that he can go sit down somewhere else because this isn't the best time. He turned to her, fury in his eyes, and yelled, "Now!" I hid my face in my hands, and I felt weak, like I was going to start hyperventilating. He sat down, and Rafida, having had enough of his shit, grabbed my arm and said, "Come on, let's go," while dragging me away and the others following. He also left the hall, but luckily he didn't follow us. Then, all of the built-up stress and anger caused me to start hyperventilating and crying because I felt like I put not only myself but the others in danger. I didn't know what to do anymore. Then Chad came and said that he will talk to him for me and ask him to sit with him instead of us. Once again, I thanked him with all of my heart, and we went back into the hall. One of my old friends, Shayla, well, he is now transgender and his name is Jaden, came up to us and we told her about the entire situation. She told us that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and that he had a book in which he wrote about plans for mass homicide, and that he calls it Samuelism. Then Chad returned and told me that Samuel wants to talk to me after science and how I probably should. So after science, I waited for him and he said that he hadn't realized that he was causing a problem. Shut up. Of course you did. How can you be so damn oblivious to your own actions? He then proceeded to tell me how bad his day was, and I ended up having to walk him to the office. I told Tim about it, and he said that he would meet me after school on Wednesday and sort it out if he doesn't stop, and I was very thankful of this. I just wanted Samuel out of my life. He still wouldn't leave me alone after all of that. He even specifically moved next to me in English class. After everything that happened on Friday, he still persisted with his little game. That day was parents' evening at school, so I went with my mom and I left my phone at home. When I got back and looked at my phone, my heart dropped. 20 messages, fucking 20 of them within half an hour, all from Samuel. I started ranting about all of this to myself and even went in the bathroom to practice what I was going to say to him the next day. I started crying again because all of this was just too much to bear. And then I decided to do something. I decided to call him out on all this stuff and inform him that a troubled childhood isn't an excuse to put someone in the same situation. He tried to guilt trip me into forgiving him by telling me about how awful his childhood was, and I admit that I felt bad for him because no one should have to go through that kind of pain. But to show him that he isn't the only one who has dealt with things in the past, I told him about myself. Halfway through me explaining that I had a lot of trouble showing and experiencing emotions as a child, and that I had a lot of violent homicidal thoughts, he interrupted me, saying that he also didn't have emotions and that he tried to kill someone because he thought it was funny. This actually pissed me off because not only was he interrupting me to add to his story and trying to make me feel even worse, He was trying to one-up me on my suffering. If you ask me, that is absolutely disgusting. You don't compare struggles because you only have your own experiences to go off of. Don't try to make another person feel as though their problems don't matter and that they shouldn't ask for help with their problems because they're too small. That's just wrong. I calmly told him that I let him finish his story without interruptions and that it was only fair for him to let me finish mine that way too. He quickly apologized, being caught out on his bullshit. I told him the rest of my story and let him realize that he really wasn't the only one who had gone through stuff in his childhood. He then began begging for me for another chance at being my friend. I declined, and I decided to talk with Sally instead, ignoring the rest of his messages. Every day until that point, and even for a while after, was just me feeling like I was going to die. I actually contemplated suicide for a while because I couldn't deal with his constant presence. I was afraid to leave my house because I felt like he would be there. I know this is a bit weird, but I felt that way because of my schizophrenia. My episodes began getting more frequent and severe. There were periods of time where I could not concentrate in class and actually couldn't hear what the teacher was saying because of my auditory hallucinations. I generally felt like shit, and it got so bad that I felt like I didn't want to be here anymore. But after telling him to bugger off, I felt like a giant weight was removed from my chest and that I could breathe my own air again. Not for long though, because he kept trying to come back into my life despite me refusing to be his friend ever again. I was still there for him, but only in absolute emergencies. And by that, I mean that only if he was on the verge of dying. I wish I could say that he left me alone since then and that I never saw him after that. But I can't, because I still see him around at school, and unfortunately, he's friends with my friend Brian, so I still have to hang out around him, which sucks. He annoys me purposely to get my attention by calling himself God and other things that suggest that he thinks way too highly of himself. Anyway, that's about it for my story. Samuel, please shut up about your godly status for a second and realize that the reason people hate you is because you do this shit. Not once, not twice, but always. So pause, think, and stop so that you don't melt any more brains. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.